Hey everyone! Content warnings for family death, animal death, discussions of potentially problematic ASPEC/neurodivergence coding in animation, and brief discussions of sexual assault, suicidality, and near-death experiences. Also, spoilers for all of Adventure Time. Take care of yourself. Also, I understand this is a podcast thing about a cartoon, but I do occasionally swear in the voiceover. I tried to change all the swears to their Adventure Time slang equivalents, but it just came out so corny. Corny by my standards even, so you know it was bad. My name is Tucker. I'm an amateur cartoonist and internet person. Currently elsewhere on this YouTube channel is my personal work, mostly animation/animation adjacent media, and a few little video essays. This is ostensibly a video essay too, but not a particularly analytical one. You'll see that it's definitely more in the "this piece of art means a lot to me, and here are some personal anecdotes as to why" genus. I'm calling it a retrospective. Yeah, that sounds right. One more thing. This video is going to spoil all 9 seasons of Adventure Time, as well as the companion series Distant Lands, and probably other ancillary media as well. Adventure Time can seem a little daunting to jump into due to its length and also often its depth. It's sometimes a little bit impenetrable unless you're sort of speaking its language, in a way that I can probably best compare to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. You look at those books, especially if you're seeing them in the form of the Big Green Collected volume, and go like, well, the exterior of this feels lighthearted and appealing enough to be not so daunting, but I have no context for this green orb thing, and might never get said context. It makes me feel like it's telling a joke that is indeed funny, but I'm just not in on it, and also it remains very, very long. I made an 110-page pitch book, so I really shouldn't get to speak about the length of things anyway, but like Hitchhiker's Guide, Adventure Time explains itself to you as it goes, while also grappling with its own absurdity, and it respects you enough to know that a big dry exposition dump in the beginning would actually make this particular story a lot more impenetrable to the average viewer. That's partially because a lot of Adventure Time was, to a certain extent, made up as it went along, and partially because some stories just aren't served by that, whether they're heavily considered at the outset or not. Comparing it to Hitchhiker's Guide again, the first book opens with exposition, but it both sets the tone and lampoons the very concept of opening with exposition by doing it in a very silly way, establishing the silly rules of a silly fictional universe. Steven Universe, one of Adventure Time's several artistic offsprings, distills a world whose lore, when you lay it all out, is actually quite dense and high concept. It accomplishes a similar feat by having pretty much the whole show firmly in Steven's point of view. You find stuff out about this world the same time he does. By the end, the information is learned rather than fed. Adventure Time is a lot more free-flowing with its character perspectives. There's a whole episode that establishes that once a year, Jake's tail gains sentience and participates in a bug circus. Adventure Time just sort of does its thing, but you can trust it, tepidly. Pay no attention to the dread part of this video's title, at least not yet. All of this is to say, despite appearances, Adventure Time isn't that difficult to get into. It's all 11-minute episodes, or else segmented into 11-minute chunks, that, while some take place chronologically before or after one another, were meant to be consumed in basically the order they were released. You can watch the show in order on HBO Max or on DVD, and it'll take a bit, but it won't be an experience you have to parse through too much. This barrier to entry shouldn't be that intense. It's dense but legible. So if you haven't seen the whole show and want to before starting this video, here's your opportunity to do that. And you certainly don't have to watch it all to watch this video, but clearly I recommend the show, so do with that what you will. I support you either way.
Excuse me? Do you know what time it is?
11:30.
Actually, it's Adventure Time! Yeah! What time is it? What time is it? What time is it? What time is it?
Adventure Time was a show on Cartoon Network whose main 9-season series ran from 2010 to 2018. It was created by Pendleton Ward, who served as showrunner from seasons 1 to 5.5. Storyboard artist Adam Muto eventually switched places with Ward from that point forward, and Muto shepherded the rest of the show and Distant Lands. Adventure Time began life as a 7-minute pilot short produced by Frederator, which was pitched to broadcast studios and gained a lot of traction after being released online. Early Adventure Time and Pendleton Ward's style as a whole was super well suited to the internet. There's a slapdash randomness in the Adventure Time pilot and Ward's sort of Sanrio, sort of Captain Underpants art style that was being echoed in independent animation on places like Newgrounds at the time. It had the novelty of the early internet, very haha WTF did I just watch, in a time when people were just beginning to discover what other people's unfiltered thoughts and creativity looked like on a massive shared platform. And just before said unfiltered thoughts began to become aggressively monetized.
Check it out, I downloaded a little dance.
Huh, I like it. Woo!
Your hat is stupid!
My hat is awesome!
For these reasons, it was very young blood to executives who found Ward and his work through screenings at CalArts. This was and still is common, as animation executives use schools like CalArts as farm teams for new ideas, which is good in many ways, and I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about how those executives should look for talent in a wide breadth of places so as not to limit the future of animation to creators who, while indeed young and more prone to innovating and interesting ideas, are bound by the demographics of the art schools they attend, which tend toward white, cis men who can afford a prohibitively expensive art education. I also had the privilege of being able to afford an art education, so my dispersions here are coming from a place of having reaped their benefits all the same. But I'll stop my acknowledgments there as to not turn this into an art school rant, which I'm sure I have plenty of in me.
She looked like she was crying.
Well, let's go cheer her up. To the max.
Yeah, let's do it.
Anyway, Adventure Time's distinctly modern wackiness was still a little beyond executives. Nickelodeon infamously passed on the show when it was pitched to them, and when Cartoon Network picked it up, it was their only animated show still in active production at the time, having gone through ill-advised live-action rebrands like some of the other major networks.
Real kids doing real stuff in real situations. Wednesday nights on CN.
Developing Adventure Time was a risk, to be sure, but it was backed up by an enthusiastic production team and the original short's virality, with fan art prominently featured in the pitch book. It was weird and new, but what Cartoon Network saw that Nick neglected was that it clearly had mass appeal somewhere, even if they couldn't catch up to it in the moment. The first few seasons of Adventure Time were fueled by its internet popularity. It got a really big merchandising push at the beginning, and I'll compare it to Sanrio again because it really did feel like that at the time. The characters were really being positioned as mascots and were popular in international markets as well because the art style shared some surface-level DNA with those very popular international mascot characters.
I get a lot of emails from fans of Adventure Time, and they're all from people who want to be a part of it in some way. They're either animation students just starting out, a lot of people who just want to be a voice, a lot of people who draw original characters who want them put into the show.
Indeed, Adventure Time ended up being partially responsible for the TV animation renaissance that we're still experiencing over a decade later, with many major productions sharing staff members with it and therefore artistic DNA. TV animation development often works like this, with standout artists on standout shows being asked to pitch to networks and creating this sort of artistic web in the process. Just look at how many things we love came from people who worked on Flapjack, and that wasn't even that long ago. Even art that didn't share its makers with Adventure Time was influenced by it. The CalArts style, in a million quotation marks, isn't as a lot of bad faith internet users describe it, but the advantages of Adventure Time and its artistic spawn's art styles on the animation pipeline can and will be felt for a long time. This probably would have happened with or without Adventure Time, though. It was just one of the first to break through and actually do it. The last aside I'll make about the CalArts style is that I do think TV animation development could stand to be less nepotistic in terms of where they get their new blood. I don't think they shouldn't solicit pitches from people who work on existing shows, because of course it's much more sure of an investment to have people make cartoons who are already making cartoons, but recruiters and executives should also be encouraged to look for talent on the wider internet, regardless of follower counts, and not just in the United States. This is more work that everyone involved should be compensated appropriately for, but dipping into increasingly shallow pools won't advance the medium. Like all animated TV shows, Adventure Time was the product of many artists who left their very distinct fingerprints on the show. Adventure Time was board-driven, a style of animated TV that forgoes scripts in favor of letting the storyboard artists write and visually stage the show at the same time. Both board and script-driven storyboard work are a lot of work, and both are becoming increasingly involved as artists are encouraged to do cleaner and more posed-out drawings that nearly amount to rough animation, a different job entirely. Adventure Time being board-driven contributed to a lot of the show's flavor. For one, it allowed episodes to feel very stream of consciousness, and given the meandering nature of the show's overarching plot, this meshed well. Being board-driven as well as not hyper-focused on model sheets as other productions let the individual board artist's visual style shine all the way through to the final animation. This, coupled with the show's prolific production Tumblr that often linked to board artists' own blossoming social media presences that would become more and more vital for board artists finding work in the present day, and hand-painted title cards that highlighted the board artist's authorship of each episode, was the beginning of an era of TV animation where board artists were less sidelined, more obvious, and kind of becoming rock stars. Adventure Time was definitely what made me want to become a storyboard artist, and I had a ton of fun being able to tell who boarded which shot from an episode just from the shot itself. It was the first of several board-driven shows in which I was able to tell.
All of our personalities are pretty different. We enjoy being behind the camera, not on the cameras.
You know what I mean?
So
Like
this is uncomfortable, all this.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know, everyone's really driven. I think that's the main thing, is like they have a real specific creative vision, even within the show, that they're pursuing. And if they're passionate about it, that usually makes it to the screen.
Storyboarding is a function, for sure, but also an art, and the Adventure Time board team were the first people I really identified as leaving very distinct personal fingerprints on the show. Now, that's a lot more common. In fact, I think it's become so common that it's actually looped back around in terms of novelty to becoming less, oh, hey, the people who work on the show are rather public about it, and that's a refreshing thing to see in American animation, and is becoming more. Now everyone needs to become incredibly distinct social media rock stars to get work at all, much less be considered for development, and there are so many amazing artists out there, but not enough time in the world to consider them all equitably. But that's another Tucker hot take for another day. What I'm saying is that Adventure Time was pretty unique from a production standpoint alone, and it worked out, for the most part, for the best. It set some industry standards to be sure, but its pioneer status is one of the things that sets it apart. Adventure Time's world is incredibly alive, something that also continues to stand out. Episode 1, we're immediately dropped into a world full of candy people, shape-shifting dogs, Korean-speaking rainbow unicorns, and D&D-esque swashbuckling magic and monsters. That fact on paper can seem like a lot, but I think it tends to get a pass in so-called kids shows where you're not expecting sensible continuity. One of the many wild things about Adventure Time, though, is that it does have continuity, quite a lot of it, and it manages to lay it out very organically and in real time, which is an accomplishment all on its own. Adventure Time began a trend of animated shows sort of Trojan horsing overarching plots into themselves. At the time, you had your Chowders and your Avatars, the former comedy-oriented, cartoony, and with little to no running plot, and the latter action-oriented, grounded, anime-influenced, and almost entirely serialized. Action shows versus comedy shows is still a thing today, but Adventure Time helped start blurring the lines in a fun way, a way that increasingly wiki-minded internet fans were prone to decode. On the surface, Adventure Time was super light and happy and random. Its humor had a wide appeal, and its aesthetics were pulling from both modern internet visual sensibilities and older school D&D style fantasy tropes. This was the hook. Then, no matter what age you were, you started noticing things as the show went on, if you were paying attention. Characters would reference past episodes. The seemingly random slang was used in consistent ways. Mathematical and Slay-ma-cow are meant to work out of context all the same, but repeat usage established that these characters have a sort of language, and therefore a culture whose rules were absurd but consistent. The Land of Ooh had its own internal logic, its own geography, its own cosmology. Gags were never just gags. They came up again, rather than resetting like most cartoons. Adventure Time had a particularly good long-term memory right from the beginning. Perhaps most subtle at first, and therefore most striking to those wiki-minded viewers, were the background elements that started popping up in later Season 1 and throughout 2. Are those just regular cars and buildings underneath stuff? Is that supposed to be a joke? If it's a joke, why do these things keep showing up? After all, hardly anything in animation can be accidental. Come to think of it, it's even in the title sequence. Remnants of nuclear bombs, human remains, skeleton of alien by Ooh standards, but recognizably modern-day buildings. What's going on here?
Look, this clipping. This was you, Simon, before the war.
It's the kind of revelation usually reserved for message board edgelords trying to add a darker subtext onto something nostalgic for them. We see it in the Ash Coma theory, the Ed, Ed and Eddie and Rugrats purgatory theories. In order to take something seriously, sometimes people have to assign adult themes and or a grand conspiracy to things most likely meant for a much more innocent subtext, if any subtext at all. The wacky show about the shape-shifting dog and candy people canonically takes place after a nuclear war is something that turns heads for sure, and if executed poorly, that could have been all it was. A substanceless provocation meant for shock and little else. But Adventure Time goes, no, let's seriously explore that to its logical conclusion. Adventure Time takes place after a nuclear war, and it weaves this into its plot with such subtlety and nuance that I can't think it was done purely for shock. And it certainly wasn't as the show went on. For the longest time, it's barely there, just window dressing. And that's because at first, it was a running joke with the show's background artists, never meant to be interpreted literally. But the rest of the show's staff took a look at it and said, what if we ran with this? What we already have is understated, but it tracks. Some of my favorite things in stories are jokes that are eventually taken very seriously. Yeah, they may have been conceived as mere bits, but they're still facts of this universe, and a fictional world written with care will care for each of its darlings, no matter how they came to exist there in the first place. If you listen to the Adventure Zone balance arc, Berry Blue Jeans is this to a T. Adventure Time has several more of these, but the Great Mushroom War, as it would come to be known, is its most foundational. The Adventure Time crew cared about making a consistent world, no matter how absurd its choices were. They had to have known that if you stick to your guns, if you maintain a good memory, your audience will too, and that will make jokes land harder and pathos do the same. So yeah, we have a first season populated by mostly self-contained episodes, mostly focused on comedy. They establish a mostly lighthearted status quo for the show. Elements like the hero's manual, the Enchiridion, are established and then appear mentioned later in the series, and things like Finn's backstory are used to both retroactively and, from then on, give context to some of his character choices. At the end of Tree Trunks, the elderly green elephant Tree Trunks is seemingly killed off as a sort of punchline to end the episode. A pretty brazen thing for a cartoon to do, but not unheard of. None of these things are too novel for a cartoon with loose continuity, and the season 1 finale doesn't follow up on any pre-established plot threads. What's novel about Adventure Time is that it doesn't stay this way. Season 2, Episode 1 gives instant fan favorite Marceline the Vampire Queen some backstory that both expands on details given rather flippantly in her Season 1 debut, and that is followed up on increasingly in episodes to come. Crystals Have Power establishes that Tree Trunks didn't die in Season 1, and talks about what happened to her when she disappeared. Foundational to this episode is a bunch of crystal-related lore named in Tree Trunks' debut episode, but greatly expanded upon here, and done so with terminology accurate to that first episode. Death in Bloom establishes an afterlife expanded upon later in the show, so much later that they only fully go into it in the Distant Land series a whole decade later, and culminates with a bit about the Adventure Time universe's manifestation of death being pals with side character Peppermint Butler that is later taken so seriously. I love the idea that they were like, it would be funny to have Peppermint Butler have a dark side, and them committing so hard to that it produces genuine pathos later in the show. It's just cool. Season 2 also establishes the character Susan Strong. The mystery of her true identity would persist until the Season 7 miniseries arc Islands, and Season 2 ends with the show's first two-parter, Mortal Folly and Mortal Recoil, which establishes major villain the Lich, ups the general stakes considerably, follows up on several Season 1 and 2 character nuggets, and sets a new status quo for Season 3. Season 2 has plenty of standalone stories, but it establishes a trend of yes-anding elements from Season 1 that the show will continue to do in perpetuity. Season 3 has more Marceline backstory, some of the show's strongest genuine pathos in the form of standout episode What Was Missing, follows up repeatedly on Princess Bubblegum having reverted to a 13-year-old at the end of Season 2, and ends changing the status quo once again by breaking Finn's crush with Princess Bubblegum in favor of new character Flame Princess. Oh, and also in Season 3, a Gooby Christmas episode later in the season culminates in revealing that the bumbling villain Ice King was once a human named Simon Petrikov, who found a crown that gave him magical dementia and ice powers that allowed him to survive the oncoming nuclear fallout. And his present-day fixation on princesses is a manifestation of his subconscious as Simon longing for his lost fiancée Betty, who Simon used to call Princess as a pet name. And this reveal is played completely straight, the only major levity coming from Ice King himself, which breaks both the tension and makes sense in universe because Ice King had no conscious memory of his past life as Simon at all.
I want people to know that if I do things that hurt anyone, please forgive me.
It's a moment that, in a show that cared less about its internal logic, would be a purely what the fuck kind of punchline, and if followed up on at all, would probably not be done so for reasons beyond increasing shock value. Like the nuclear war thing, it could have easily been a provocative footnote. But again, Adventure Time commits to the Ice King's backstory hard. Not all at once, despite what the exposition dump in Holly Jolly Secrets would have you believe. In most other shows, it would be a pretty huge reveal, but Ice King immediately glosses over it, and Finn and Jake react pretty realistically and non-TV show-like to the whole thing. They're just like, oh wow, that's fucked up and sad.
Drama bomb!
Now you know my secret. You know that I used to wear glasses.
And no one mentions it for almost a whole season. Ice King's condition becomes central to later episodes and is used for legitimately soul-crushing moments of retroactive character development and sincere commentary on memory loss in loved ones.
Do you feel awesome?
Mm-hmm. I love you, Simon.
I love you, Gunter.
They commit, but they take their time. Adventure Time is in it for the long game. Remember what I said about the afterlife not really being expanded upon until the sequel series? There are tons of examples of that kind of thing happening throughout the show. Plot threads and world building that are abandoned and picked up on seasons past their introduction. Adventure Time meanders, but it never forgets. It makes the world feel more consistent and alive than most fictional settings, period. Its logic is absurd and chaotic, but it tracks. Even bit characters and elements have realistic consequences on the world. Anyway, late Season 3 and the whole of Season 4 really cement what I call Adventure Time's teen era. This is helped by the fact that Finn's voice actor, Jeremy Shada, has been on the show for a couple years at this point, and his voice is starting to change, giving the impression that Finn is also aging. Something pretty uncommon for cartoons where things more or less reset at the end.
Those old ladies are destroyed because of me. I'm not righteous. I'm wrongtious.
Man, I still can't believe Marceline is 1,000 years old and has never seen heat signature. This movie is gonna blow their minds.
Well, now that's just great. You don't put traps in the foyer. The foyer is a safe space.
Up to this point, we've watched Finn undergo some coming-of-age protagonist tropes. It manifests most clearly with Princess Bubblegum. His angst over he and Bubblegum's age gap almost disappears entirely after Bubblegum turns 13 at the end of Season 2. But by the end of Season 3, she's reverted back to her original age, and Finn is reminded that it just can't work. It's not only in a romantic sense, either. What am I to you? Do you look down on me because I'm younger? Isn't just because Finn wants to be seen as a viable romantic partner. He's infantilized by Bubblegum, Marceline, and even side characters like Sir Slicer in Season 2, although that was more about Finn's lack of body armor than his age. Still, the Land of Ooh is full of heroes, and Finn is a small fish in a big pond. Many Season 3 episodes like Too Young, What Was Missing, Another Way, and Dad's Dungeon start framing Finn's angst in general a lot more seriously. He starts feeling like a character with mounting dramatic tension, as in more serialized shows. Shows with no or little continuity still tend to have consistent characters with personality traits that inform their actions, but in serialized shows there's a through line, a build-up, an arc. Finn is arcing into some major angst at this point in the show, and that feels authentic to growing into a teenager.
PB, I was in love with you, okay? And you didn't love me back. Now I'm ready to move on, and it's like, you're gonna build me up all over again. Well, I'm done. I'm done.
I was growing up alongside Finn. We were even canonically the same age for a little while, as I'm sure a lot of the show's demographic was. It was sort of a hyper-exaggerated version of my own experience. And at what I consider the first major peak of his arc in the Season 3 finale, Finn has become pretty inconsolable over Bubblegum, and the show frames this with an appropriate emotional gravity, using Rebecca Sugar's songwriting skills and expressive storyboarding.
Every move I make is just another mistake. I wonder what it would take, because it feels like there's a hole inside my body. Like there's a hole inside my heart.
Rebecca Sugar's fingerprints on Seasons 3, 4, and 5 really can't be overstated. They wrote most of the songs in the show at that point, scattered sporadically throughout the show, but important feeling as a result. And these moments of really palpable emotion serve as punctuation in the show's dramatic through line it's starting to develop. So the Season 3 finale opens with one of the most upsetting songs with some of the most pain drawings in the show so far. Previous events in the show have real emotional consequences, and Finn has reached a breaking point. This episode follows Jake trying to find Finn a love interest his own age, and introduces the recurring character Flame Princess, who Jake thinks is a suitable suitor for Finn, but is in fact repressed by her life of captivity and therefore, quote-unquote, evil. The finale ends with Finn developing a crush on Flame Princess, and the Season 4 premiere directly continues the events of that night. Season 4 increases the show's focus on continuity ever still. There's another Marceline two-parter, follow-ups on previously sort of bit characters Magic Man and Ricardio, in which both characters are treated a lot more seriously.
Magic Man, what is your deal for real?
You tell me.
Well, for one, I think this house is a reflection of your sick brain. Look at this. Yuck. Who's this you're standing with in this picture?
Memories drift in and out of my mind, and the little people get left behind. So whatever.
And, of course, frequent developments to Finn and Flame Princess's fraught relationship. The central tension of their relationship, that Flame Princess is literally made out of fire so she and Finn can't make safe physical contact, is played for comedy, but more often legitimate drama.
Even if we like each other, we're going to hurt each other.
No, we don't have to. I can take it. I mean, can't we try?
You would defy nature for me?
Yeah.
Finn's lamentation of
"Why can't I just like a girl?"
in the Season 4 premiere refers to his fraught relationship with Princess Bubblegum, compounded with his immediate pitfalls in pursuing Flame Princess, and it casts a shadow over the rest of he and Flame Princess's relationship throughout Seasons 4 and 5. It's true that Finn's only had these two romantic pursuits in his life, but when that's your sample size and you're a teenager, you're gonna react in that heightened way to it. I certainly did. Season 4 balances relationship angst and the continual yes-anding of world building and character elements really well, sometimes all in the same episode. We learn that some of the other kingdoms in the Land of Ooh have their own politics and inner conflicts, and we get the first big nuggets of inclination that Princess Bubblegum is not a very ethical ruler, which compounds later on, and Jake's girlfriend Lady Rainicorn is revealed to be pregnant, which is followed up on in Season 5. The end of Season 4 is really, really something. It's the start of Adventure Time's more ballsy story moves. The penultimate Season 4 episode, I Remember You, follows up on the whole Ice King thing in a big way. It establishes history between Marceline and the Ice King, who had hardly been shown to interact at all previously, and it explicitly confirms the post-apocalypse elements to boot.
Marceline, is it just you? you and me in the wreckage of the world.
It's an incredibly emotional episode without a squeaky clean resolution, and it's the culmination of several beats for both of these characters that weren't telegraphed to us super explicitly. We know who these characters are well enough 4 seasons in a super organic and sort of Trojan horse-esque way, that watching them break isn't jarring to the point of being unnatural. It's an amazing episode that the show has been earning in relative understated silence. The following episode and season 4 finale, The Lich, is amazing too. It expands on the role of princesses anew in the form of their crown gems, and establishes a multiverse in Adventure Time, highlighting that the show has only just begun its capacity for yes-anding itself constantly.
Once the last gem is inserted into the Enchiridion, it will have the power to create a portal to any dimension in the multiverse. An activated portal creates a time dilation in which either end of the portal experiences a temporal synchronization, allowing for the safe passage of particles through a non-local region of space-time.
The Lich also has one of the ballsiest cliffhangers in TV history, but I'll get to that after I establish the episode's extreme sense of dread.
Billy was real scared something fierce, man. Something real fierce. And the Cosmic Owl was there too. Kinda. Screeching it up.
Whoa, the Cosmic Owl? What if that was a premonition dream, Finn?
You think?
Could be. We better code tell Billy about it just in case. He'll know what to do.
Dang. Whoa.
On paper, it makes sense why Finn and Jake don't see this circumstance as too weird. Premonition dreams have been a thing in the show thus far, and while this is definitely the most ominous one yet, it's not unheard of in this universe. It also tracks that the Lich snail thing would be followed up on. Up to this point in the show, there's been a little snail in the background of each episode, and it's been a fun little game to try and find the funny snail cameo. But at one point, the Lich possesses the snail, and it gets a few ominous reappearances throughout seasons 3 and 4. This is another example of Adventure Time's continual commitment to the long game, and also an example of ratcheting dread in the show. But because it hadn't become an immediate problem to Finn and Jake yet, it did just that, ratcheted in the background. Finn has a premonition dream of the snail lich attacking his hero figure Billy, so they go to Billy's cave to warn him, and Billy takes them on an abrupt quest in the night to secretly retrieve all the princess's crown gems, which will supposedly protect them all from a lich attack. Finn and Jake are swept up in an important quest involving quality time with their mentor, but to the audience there's a subtle sense of something wrong. That dream was particularly unsettling and symbolic in a Twin Peaksy sort of way.
Dark times are coming.
Billy's acting pretty weird. They're all doing this in the middle of the night and in secret, and altogether it just feels off somehow. In the end, Princess Bubblegum helps reveal that the Lich killed Billy, is wearing his skin, and has been tricking Finn and Jake into this mission all along.
Finn, stop! That's not Billy! It's the Lich!
Huh? Lich? You messed Billy up. You just want to mess me all up. Mess everyone up. You tricked me.
No, child. It's all true. The book has great power. I can make you live forever. Anything you want. Just give me that book.
The Lich has been responsible for some of the most intense things to happen in the show thus far by design. The pitch book for Adventure Time cements that the Lich is not funny, a rule that the show runs with for the most part through all 9 seasons. The Lich being there at all is a signal to the audience that shit is now real, and Billy's entirely off-screen death and subsequent creepy skin theft is fully in line with how the Lich snail tension was ratcheted almost entirely off-screen itself. It's another intense dramatic moment that is earned through quiet and understated tension building. Finn and Jake pursue the Lich through a portal to the multiverse, and the wild cliffhanger happens. We cut to an alternate Finn and Jake, entirely out of context, for just a moment before the episode ends. This version of Finn had been depicted briefly in the episode King Worm, which took place mostly in dreams and didn't call attention to the cameo at all. And this version of Finn is also missing an arm, something that had been subtly hinted at throughout the show. Finn's idealized version of himself from an early episode is missing a right arm, as was his alternate future self in the episode Dungeon Train, and later in the episode Pahoy. For people who were paying attention at the time, it was a really subtle signal of like, oh geez, is this foreshadowing that Finn is going to lose an arm at some point? And this alternate Finn was a big tally mark on that proverbial board. Robot arm. Weird. The whole thing was just really weird and wild and felt climactic in an awful, inevitable sort of way. The show's symbology was converging into some very dramatically compelling stuff, and the tone shift was pretty incredible. I remember the month-long wait between the end of season 4 and the 2-part season 5 premiere being pretty brutal. Tumblr, which had fixated on the show largely because of the seasons 3 and 4 teen angst shipping stuff and stayed hooked by the interesting and consistent lore, was on fire with theories after this episode, having been previously rocked by the highs and lows of the Flame Princess episodes and I Remember You, confirming a lot of other quietly established stuff. It was a fun time, and it was a real turning point in the show's style of serialization. Just as a lot of characters were starting to mature and show emotional consequences, so was Adventure Time storytelling as a whole. The two-part Season 5 premiere, Jake the Dog and Finn the Human, continues where the Lich left off and posits, okay, you've been becoming acquainted with the rules of this fictional universe for 4 seasons. What if we shuffled them around a bunch? The Lich's goal at the end of Season 4 was to enter the between-universes domain of Prismo the Wishmaster and wish for the extinction of all life. His goal is the end of everything, and some people find that uninteresting, but I don't for reasons I'll talk about later. Basically, the Lich is a force of nature, and that's scary. Finn and Jake, afforded safety in Prismo's time room, are able to make a counter-wish. Finn wishes that
The Lich never even ever existed.
Plunging him into an alternate wish reality, the farm world we saw in the Season 4 cliffhanger. And from within the time room, Jake is forced to watch farm world Finn do his thing. This episode directly ties the Lich to the nuclear bomb that is responsible for the Prime Universe's post-apocalypse setting. He was created, as a lot of things in Adventure Time ultimately were, from nuclear fallout somehow reawakening magic on Earth after a period of dormancy, a cycle that the show later establishes ebbs and flows every 1,000 years. In this universe, the Lich never existed, meaning the bomb never went off, but farm world Finn discovers that the farm world version of Simon, the Ice King, gave his life to prevent the nuclear war with his crown's ice magic. Even in this universe, the Lich was only narrowly avoided, and the bomb still lies dormant underground, it and the crown guarded by an alternate aged Marceline. There's a grim inevitability to this realization, especially because this version of Finn lacks the comparative context to fully understand it. Finn Prime didn't wish for the bomb to never have existed, only for the Lich to never have existed. And Finn Prime also lacked the pieces to make this connection. In fact, the only people who have all those pieces are the audience. We're closest to being in Jake's shoes in this episode, watching helplessly as events play out, finally beginning to understand the bigger picture but unable to help his brother. It's pretty fucked up, and what's even more fucked up is that in a desperate bid to save his family from gang violence, Farmworld Finn dons the ice crown and unwittingly sets off the bomb, going insane and creating the Lich once again. The Lich feels like a force of nature rather than just a character here, which the show doubles down on later in big ways. Jake eventually changes the Lich's original wish to prevent the entire thing from even happening, but only after the Farmworld universe is plunged into a really horrible reality, one that the distinctly post-apocalyptic setting of the Prime universe goes out of its way to not depict unless absolutely necessary. The whimsical veneer of the show's surface-level elements are being peeled back, but vitally not entirely stripped away. The show is still itself, still funny and absurd, it just has range that gets deeper with time, like life. Season 5 was wild. It's the longest season of the show, twice as long as a normal 26-episode season, and subsequent seasons would be longer than 26 as well for reasons I don't fully understand. A lot happens in the rest of Season 5, but for our purposes, I'll focus on 5 tentpoles, which is still a lot, but this is a long season of television, so we're just gonna run with it. We got Finn and Flame Princess's relationship, Princess Bubblegum's morality, the Ice King stuff, the Lemon Hope stuff, and the stuff about Finn's arm. Let's go one at a time. After taking kind of a backseat, we refocus on Finn and Flame Princess, who are doing decent despite their differences until Finn watches Flame Princess and the Ice King fight and has kind of a wet dream about it. Yeah, the show doesn't skirt around this, and honestly I feel like it's a pretty authentic depiction of teenage sexual desire, while also tracking with Finn's character. I mean, Finn and Flame Princess want to be able to touch each other in any capacity, and not being able to has been a big source of tension for them, so it makes sense that he'd fantasize about that. The Cosmic Owl, a deity whose presence in dreams deems them prophetic, appears in Finn's dream, and Finn decides to have Flame Princess fight the Ice King again in real life to see if he can finish the dream, ostensibly so he can find any prophetic messages that it's hiding, but mainly for the satisfaction of being able to touch his girlfriend in any capacity. It's the kind of self-motivated decision that makes a lot of sense for a teenager, and when Flame Princess finds out he staged the fight, she breaks up with him.
I thought you were the one person I could... I need some time alone.
Princess, but... I said I was sorry.
It's really sad, and it's Finn's fault. It's a pretty authentic dissolution of a teenage relationship. The Ice Kingdom gets almost completely destroyed in the process, which forces Ice King to live with Finn, furthering a general taming of Ice King's antagonism toward Finn and Jake throughout the show. He's a serial kidnapper with consent issues, and I don't think the show excuses this, but it's explained by his crown and his memory loss, and Ice King is definitely framed more sympathetically than not from here on out, albeit still pretty pathetic. There's a lot of angst in this part of the show. It takes a while for Finn to internalize how selfish his actions were, and in the episode Love Games, Finn sings a song lamenting his breakup.
When I'm heating up my lunch or delivering a dungeon punch, I can't get over you.
There's some post-breakup awkwardness in the first few interactions between Finn and Flame Princess, which ultimately reach some cathartic closure for the both of them. But all in all, it's very authentic. It felt more so to me at the time because not only were Finn and I the same age at this point, but the Flame Princess breakup arc started airing during my first teenage breakup. It really helped me to see a character I had grown up with go through some of the same stuff. I also think these episodes function well as another notch in Finn's coming-of-age belt. He's experienced loss, and also acted pretty unheroically in his unintended but still shitty spurning of Flame Princess.
When we broke up, I said sorry, but I didn't fully understand exactly what I did wrong. I get it now. I shouldn't have manipulated you. That was a really, really messed up thing to do, and I'm truly sorry.
You've grown up a lot, man. I forgive you.
Season 5 really cements Princess Bubblegum's gray at best morality, which had been building all along. The impression that she's not actually such a benevolent ruler gets a lot harder to ignore as it becomes central to a lot of plots. For starters, Princess Bubblegum is revealed to have made some big missteps in Lemongrab's personal development that Lemongrab resents her for.
But you don't get along with others. I don't understand you, Lemongrab.
No one understands! I am alone, and you made me like this!
She runs pretty much constant surveillance on the Candy Kingdom and much of Ooo as a whole. She's revealed to have put Flame Princess in captivity for most of her life. She has a general disregard for the sanctity of life, a lax attitude toward non-consensual cloning, has a disdain toward magic that almost gets her, Finn, and Jake killed. She kinda ruins Tree Trunk's wedding, and she's revealed to have genocided her own police robots, and that's just stuff that happened or came to light in Season 5 alone. It's a downward trend for Princess Bubblegum's character, morality-wise, and because a lot of this stuff happened in the past, it serves retroactively too. It recontextualizes her character from the very beginning of the show. Princess Bubblegum is incredibly maternalistic. She's smarter than most people and thinks she knows best, and she has the technology, authority, and self-righteousness to play God, so she does. The show allows its audience to come to their own conclusion about her actions and portrays them with enough nuance to leave room for interpretation, while still framing them in such a way where it's like, whether she was right or wrong, we can all agree that it's still a pretty fucked up situation.
Is this right or wrong? I can't tell.
I don't know, man.
Again, it's a downward trend of morality, and within Season 5, it sees no upticks, so it begs the question, is Adventure Time taking its time redeeming Princess Bubblegum like it did for the Ice King, or is it trying to cement Princess Bubblegum as a bona fide villain? The answer is both. That's just kind of how the show works, but I'll get into that later. Speaking of Ice King, the Adventure Time staff didn't let I Remember You hang there nearly as long as they did with Holly Jolly Secrets. Season 5 features Rebecca Sugar's final episode, Simon and Marcy, a full flashback episode detailing Simon's caretaker role to young Marceline in a recently post-apocalypse cityscape. The war only just happened, and Simon and Marcy are the only known survivors, both imbued with the immunity of magic in a world where magic is just beginning to reawaken. It'll be another 1,000 years until there are magic dogs and candy people, and for the first time we live in a very grounded post-apocalypse, with scary mutilated radiation zombies and a scarcity of food and resources. Rebecca Sugar had been responsible for establishing much of Finn's relationship angst, as well as writing the music for and co-storyboarding I Remember You. In Simon and Marcy, she would shepherd this plotline one last time, delivering some really gut-wrenching conflict in the deterioration of Simon's mind. We know that Simon eventually leaves the young Marceline to fend for herself in this dangerous post-apocalypse, a fact that Marceline resents Simon for until discovering his goodbye note from I Remember You. That sense of fatalistic inevitability rears its head again as Simon and Marcy repeatedly reminds you this does not last forever. This goes very bad and causes everyone involved a lot of suffering. This is a calm before the storm. Later, there's the episode Betty, which complicates that feeling even more. An anti-magic deity negates the effects of Ice King's crown, reverting him back to Simon. In a strange new world, he enlists Finn, Jake, and Marceline to help build a fucking time machine using sentimentality magic. This was set up as a thing in previous episodes. It's still pretty wild, but not a complete jump of the shark. So he can make amends with Betty. All the way back in Holly Jolly Secrets, Simon explains that his deteriorating mental state and ice powers drove Betty away, and his fixation on Betty, who he calls his princess, drives the Ice King's need to kidnap princesses in the present day, which happen to exist. Simon apologizes to Betty, and Betty manages to jump into the time portal, revealing that she never actually left Simon that day, she merely met up with him 1,000 years later. It's really sweet until Simon starts rapidly aging. The last 1,000 years are starting to catch up with him without the Ice Crown's magic. Betty defeats the anti-magic monster and reverts Simon back to the Ice King so he can survive, at the cost of Simon's memories. Even though they're in the same time and place now, they still can't be together. Betty begins this very tragic will they won't they thing with Simon and Betty. They can reunite briefly in half-formed ways, but never fully, never without a cruel caveat. And poor Simon can't retain his memories without dying. He can't be alive without being someone he really doesn't want to be.
Get real, man. You're gonna be the Ice King till the sun blows up.
It's inescapable and really fucked up, and the show treats it as such. There's really no glimmer of hope at the end of Betty, other than that Betty survived and is somewhere in Ooo. Hope is left dangling at best, and Adventure Time makes its all-ages audience really sit with that. It's salt in the wound that Simon and Betty have switched roles now in some ways. It's gone from Simon impossibly trying to get Betty back to Betty impossibly trying to get Simon back, and the roles are only more reversed as the show goes on. It's a mature thing to do because it demonstrates trust in their audience and their own ratcheting of gray areas and intense themes thus far. So the Lemon Grab episodes are a whole thing unto themselves, which I'll try to summarize quickly here. I mentioned earlier that Lemon Grab has some beef with Bubblegum. Princess Bubblegum created the Earl of Lemon Grab to serve as the Candy Kingdom's heir if something were to happen to her. However, being an early attempt at creating artificial life, Lemon Grab quote-unquote went wrong and escaped. The actual way in which he went wrong is pretty vague, but later interactions with Princess Bubblegum established that they just don't really understand each other, and some of the language used therein has been interpreted by some folks to be a metaphor for being autistic or otherwise neuroatypical. Lemon Grab doesn't understand social cues, is abrasive, has a different style than other candy people, and blames Bubblegum for quote-unquote making him like this. Lemon Grab is villainized for this, which isn't great, but I'd say it's ultimately done with a fair bit of sympathy. Lemon Grab does pretty terrible things, but he's never fully demonized for them, partially because a lot of it is positioned as Princess Bubblegum's fault for isolating him. Even in death, Lemon Grab isn't beyond redemption. Bubblegum puts him back together, and he's neutral at worst for the rest of the show. I say Lemon Grab isn't fully demonized, but he's also not demonized. At one point, he becomes Kim Jong-un, which isn't great.
I'm inside my fortified totalitarian city-state.
Adventure Time has another perceived autism metaphor in the form of Season 7 episode Nettie, which people perceive to be a lot more positive.
But Nettie's from the same place you're from, and he's a wet hot dog around everyone.
People get built different. We don't need to figure it out, we just need to respect it.
Also, the recurring character Cinnamon Bun is quote-unquote half-baked and also sometimes associated with neuroatypicality and birth defects. He's generally depicted positively, albeit also the butt of some, oh haha, he doesn't understand what's going on kind of jokes. Cinnamon Bun is also cured of his half-bakedness at one point, after which he becomes a lot more serious and competent, which isn't a wonderful analogy, for sure. If anyone on the spectrum took issues with any of these depictions in the show, I would 100% agree and understand. They are messy at best. At one point, Bubblegum creates a second Lemon Grab to rule his earldom alongside, hoping that the common ground will create harmony. It does for a while, until the Lemon Grabs begin to disagree, and one actually ends up taking a huge bite out of the other's head, creating a sort of dom and sub Lemon Grab dynamic. The earldom is also full of terrifying inbred lemon people who become increasingly enslaved by their abusive masters. It's pretty fucked up. One of these lemon offspring is the child prodigy harpist Lemon Hope, who the two Lemon Grabs confine in the bathroom because his traditionally competent music playing is actually unpleasant and potentially deadly for the Lemon Grabs to hear. Lemon Hope is raised, abused, and neglected in a literal bathroom until Finn and Princess Bubblegum end up busting him out. There's a two-parter at the end of Season 5 following up on Lemon Hope's freedom. He's being re-educated in the Candy Kingdom and groomed to return to the earldom and free his oppressed people from the literal totalitarian city-state it has become. But Lemon Hope is his own person with a life now and is tired of being told what to do. Lemon Hope embarks on a journey to find freedom and is eventually met by the nomadic monster hunter Flannel Boxing Day, who is heavily implied to be Princess Bubblegum in disguise, low-key manipulating Lemon Hope into saving the earldom anyway. Which he does, and it's a good thing because the earldom was worse, or at least worse on its face, than Princess Bubblegum in the Candy Kingdom. But, you know, it's still a very shady decision on Bubblegum's part that the show doesn't drive you to sympathize with either way. At the end of the episode, Princess Bubblegum reconstructs Lemon Grab and offers Lemon Hope a seat of authority in the reconstructed Lemon earldom. But Lemon Hope declines, still in pursuit of his own freedom. He says,
"See you in 1,000 years, I guess. Peace!"
and walks off unceremoniously. Princess Bubblegum is like, that's a shame, I wrote a song for him and everything. Finn asks to hear the song, and Princess Bubblegum sings by herself for the first time we've seen in the show. We flash forward, quote-unquote, 1,000 years, I guess, to an old Lemon Hope wandering a ruined ooh, hooked to life support machines. The world is in a similar state to the Simon and Marcy recent post-apocalypse, but this time it is decidedly derivative of the world of ooh rather than of Earth. We see a ruined city with candy motifs in its architecture, and Finn and Jake's treehouse has grown beyond the clouds. If you remember, the Great Mushroom War happened 1,000 years prior to the start of the show. Now, Adventure Time posits that another cataclysm will occur on the same timescale, but this time it will devastate a world we are intimately familiar with. It stands to reason that no characters the audience cares about will be alive in 1,000 years. But at the same time, Season 5 establishes that Princess Bubblegum is at least 800 years old, and that magic, now no longer dormant on Earth, can grant people immunity to such cataclysms, like Marceline and the Ice King. Lemon Hope is a candy person like Princess Bubblegum, but he needs futuristic life support to survive in this environment, and he's the only living thing we see in this flashback other than the Goliath treehouse. In this haunting little sequence, Adventure Time posits that everything we know and love in this Technicolor Wonderworld will eventually succumb to the same cycle of war and rebirth that created it in the first place. Again, the timescales here are really long, but good lord is that bleak. More Adventure Time dealing in dread. It's basically a second language. Cycles of violence and abuse, maybe doomed to repeat. Jesus Christ. Finally, Finn's arm. Remember how a lot of versions of Finn lost their right arms? That happens a couple more times in Season 5, like in the Pillow Dimension, before the most overt threat to our Finn's arm is introduced, the grass sword. Finn needs a new sword, and he gets a cool one made out of grass, but it's cursed and won't detach from his wrist. It also seems to have a mind of its own, sometimes acting of its own volition and giving Finn higher than normal sword-fighting aptitude in the process. It's creepy, and something that Finn just sort of has to live with for a while, but doubly so for the audience, who's gotten these hints of Finn losing that very arm for a while now, and now it's been magically bound by this creepy sword. It's this constant reminder that, hey, maybe Finn's gonna lose that arm, better watch out, and so the dread persists. Adventure Time is really into eliciting this very specific feeling, and there's a very specific reason for that, I think, but like Adventure Time itself, it'll take us a little while to get there. Season 5 ends with the confirmation that Finn's father is alive somewhere in space. Finn's long-lost parentage and status as the last known human in Oo is a sore spot for him, so he's motivated to meet his dad. A lot of really good stuff happens in the two-part Season 6 premiere, but the important ones are that Finn's dad is a terrible person, and Finn's fruitless pursuit of his affection drives Season 6 as a whole. Finn and Jake unwittingly free the Lich from Prismo's time room, re-establishing him as a plot thread and major villain. Finn also finally loses that arm in pursuit of his dad, a flower in its place to indicate that while the grass sword may no longer be on his wrist, he can't escape it as a part of him. Can you spell inevitability? I barely can. It's Adventure Time's love language at this point. Season 6 is driven by the dad stuff, but I often call it the cosmic season, a la Cosmic Marvel, given how hardcore, existential, and cosmological this season becomes in particular. It starts and ends in space, and while the conflict with Finn and his dad is ultimately a very personal one, Finn and other characters in the season do a lot of philosophizing about things like the nature of life and death, and whether or not anything we do on this earthly coil is worth it, and whether or not vicious cycles are doomed to repeat.
If just being born is the greatest act of creation, then what are you supposed to do after that? Isn't everything that comes next sort of a disappointment? Slowly entropying until we deflate into a pile of mush?
And yeah, Season 6 is kind of a lot. It's amazing though. It might be my favorite. Season 6 episode The Tower features more Finn's arm and Finn's dad's stuff, and it establishes some tarot card symbology that carries on throughout the show. In Season 6 episode Breezy, Finn attempts to fill the void of depression left by his breakup with Flame Princess with multiple hookups, and then, for real, is implied to have been sexually assaulted by Lumpy Space Princess. Jesus Christ. Something Big and Astral Plane have some pretty profound existential musings. Also, the Lich turns into a giant baby named Sweet Pea. Jake is actually the offspring of a shapeshifted alien that impregnated his father's scalp. Finn's arm turns into a tree for a sec, and the Ice King's funny penguin Gunther is actually an impossibly evil eldritch abomination called Orgalorg. And for the purposes of this video, those aren't even a super big deal in the grand scheme of things. Those are just a few of the absolutely swing-for-the-fences wild choices Season 6 of Adventure Time makes, all the while managing to tell a cohesive beginning-to-end story about paternal love and existentialism. Similar to the Finn and Flame Princess stuff in Season 4, Season 6 regularly checks back in on Finn and his dad. Finn's dad has been trying to avoid him since the season premiere, and Finn is resentful and skeptical of him, but he still believes he might come around. It's another notch in Finn's belt of coming-of-age tropes, and I think it's handled beautifully. Season 6 is doing a lot of different things, and it kind of just throws them out there week after week. I'll mention some more prescient Season 6 happenings for our purposes, though. Season 6 does a lot of heavy lifting for Adventure Time's cosmology. Season 4 officially introduced Glob, Gob, Grod, Grob, effectively this universe's equivalent to God. It's funny/wild because early on, as part of the show's penchant for weird slang, characters would say variations on "Oh my Glob" to avoid saying "Oh my God" on a kid's show, and it's very in line with Adventure Time as a whole that the crew was like, okay, but what if they're referring to a real entity who lives on Mars with Abraham Lincoln until Abe switched places in the afterlife with Jake and turned into a penny? Look, a lot of weird shit happens in this show, okay? Anyway though, in a standout episode of Season 6, Astral Plane, Finn astral projects and witnesses vignettes of people all around Oo, and eventually Mars, where Glob is leading an assault against something called a catalyst comet. Glob explains to his cohort Starman,
"It doesn't make sense. Every 1,000 years, the catalyst comet mysteriously reincarnates itself and collides with Earth, bringing with it an agent of change. But the comet's never been so off schedule. And it's never freaking hit Mars."
There's that 1,000-year timetable again. An agent of change. A nuclear war is an agent of change, in a manner of speaking. How about 2? Bookmark that for later. Finn converses with Glob and asks him if being born is the greatest act of creation, and if everything afterward is a disappointment. Glob states a central theme of Season 6.
"Well, it's not enough to have created something amazing, right? What if I just let my Martian super society go to pot?"
In other words, maintaining a creation, seeing it through, makes the act of creation more meaningful. Glob demonstrates this by colliding with the catalyst comet, sacrificing himself in the process. The Nietzschean death of Glob. Put that in your all-ages animated show and watch it, sucker.
Glob is dead.
Also having to do with cycles and futility is the really intense episode Evergreen. Apropos of basically nothing, this episode establishes the origins of the Ice King's crown. It was created in prehistoric times when the manifestation of the ice element, Evergreen, opposite the manifestations of the other elements, fire, candy, and slime, makes a crown that will grant its wearer their greatest wish in order to stop a comet from colliding with Earth. This is the Catalyst Comet's incarnation of over 10,000 years ago, and it bears a striking resemblance to the Lich, implying that the Lich is more a force of nature than the bomb would even imply. He's an agent of destruction that has existed basically forever, and the Lich is just the form he's currently taking. Evergreen has a little dinosaur apprentice named Gunther, who helps him retrieve the gems needed to power the crown. All the while, Gunther tries to convince Evergreen to teach him magic, but Evergreen is another one of Adventure Time's shitty paternal figures, and neglects and berates Gunther pretty much constantly.
Get in here, Gunther! Ah, there you are, you blockhead.
When the time comes to fend off the comet, Evergreen is rendered incapacitated. Gunther has to put on the crown. Evergreen instructs Gunther to don the crown and make his greatest wish, but Gunther's true greatest wish is to be like his master Evergreen. Gunther transforms to look like Evergreen, and therefore the Ice King, and can only shout,
Gunther, no. Gunther, no.
Gunther, buddy, what are you wishing for down there?
No. Gunther, no! Gunther, no! Gunther, no! Gunther, no!
as Evergreen realizes he wished to be like me, and I'm a huge asshole, and also if I had taught him magic like he wanted, he'd be able to focus himself and save us, but now we're fucked. And then they all die. All ages animation, baby! So the 1,000 years thing is pretty firmly established by now. A force that's also strong in Season 6 is that a lot of problems in the show are caused by abusive paternal figures. There are a lot of bad dads in Adventure Time. Finn's dad Martin isn't even the most recent one Season 6 introduces once Evergreen rolls around. I haven't even talked about Marceline's dad much in this video, but she has a complicated, mostly bad relationship with him for most of the show. She also has abandonment issues with Simon, and as we come to learn in the Distant Lands series, also her mom. Even Jake isn't a perfect dad, leading to some ultimately smooth resentment fostered in some of his pups, who age rapidly as Jake pursues a life of adventure and recreation. Much later, Jake's biological alien dad sucks a lot, and of course Princess Bubblegum and her paternalism complex causes a ton of problems throughout the whole show. It's cycles of abuse, sometimes cycles that are thousands of years old, constantly reincarnating after hardly anyone is left alive to remember what went wrong and potentially change it. Cycles of abuse in our real lives can feel insurmountable. On a global, societal scale, some of our real cycles have lasted thousands of years. It makes you think. It's true what they say, they being the cartoon and the people who done made it. Season 6 ends with a cosmic confrontation between Finn, Jake, and Gunther, now Orgalorg, who threatens to eat the approaching Catalyst Comet. Also, Finn has a final confrontation with his dad.
Finn, no answer I give you will be satisfying.
But why do you always run from everything?
You burn enough bridges, the only direction to move is forward.
Well, there ain't no change in you, I guess.
Well, I'm glad we finally understand each other.
Also, Princess Bubblegum is ousted from her rule over the Candy Kingdom after a forced election by an arguably worse king made out of earwax. Orgalorg is defeated, and the comet offers Finn the chance to ascend to a higher plane of existence. The comet's proposition is the climax of Finn's existential journey throughout Season 6.
I've been around forever and experienced so much impossible junk. I've embodied all that is good and evil, and now we're here. It's unprecedented, and I give you a choice. Come with me to the end and the beginning, or struggle here a while like a beautiful autumn leaf.
The questions posed in episodes like Astral Plane are brought to the forefront here when the comet gives Finn an opportunity to make good on those hypotheticals if he so desires. But in a really beautiful moment, Finn declines.
I feel like I put a lot of work into this meat reality. I'd like to see it through.
Fair enough.
Finn's making good on the lesson Glob taught him in Astral Plane, that it's worth it to finish what you started, because the meaning of life is what you make it. Finn's dad, however, accepts the comet's offer without a second thought, and Finn realizes, I guess there's just no changing you, is there? The decision to ascend to a new mode of reality is positioned as selfish. Martin abandoned putting work into his quote-unquote meat reality a long time ago, and he's now thoughtlessly abandoning his only chance to maybe salvage it. Finn's given him nothing but open arms, and now he has to accept that they just have different priorities. It's an incredibly mature sentiment to put in your all-ages cartoon, and the way they tied Finn's existential crisis into the stuff with his dad was done with a very deft hand. It's a lot, but it tracks, and it makes for a cohesive season in and amongst all of the scattershot craziness. Heady existential concepts are grounded by character arcs seasons in the making. The last thing I'll say about the Season 6 finale is that there was this extra element of dread playing into its lead-up. The Season 3 episode, The New Frontier, really codified the concept of premonition dreams featuring the Cosmic Owl that the show would use throughout its run. In The New Frontier, Jake has a dream of dying in space with the Cosmic Owl and a Banana Man, and without Finn there with him. He's convinced this dream will come to pass, and when the Banana Man happens to move in next door, Jake accepts that his end is close at hand. But Finn doesn't want his brother to die, so he's resolved to avoid the circumstances around Jake's Croak dream as much as possible. While the incredibly incredibly zen Jake is resigned to its fate. At the end of the episode, the circumstances of Jake's Croak dream are recreated, but it turns out it wasn't in space, it was underwater, and Finn is able to rescue Jake before he drowns. It seems like the premonition was just off, and they both jump to conclusions about the whole thing, but Jake posits that if it was really his Croak dream coming to pass, Finn wouldn't have been there at all, meaning it could still happen. Finn resolves to never leave Jake's side so his Croak dream can never come true, and it's played as a joke at the time, but subsequently, Finn is more protective of Jake throughout the show, implying that this idea still lingers in the back of his mind. And anytime Finn and Jake approached space and/or interacted with the Banana Man, people online would always kind of tense up and make posts like, oh Jesus, Jake's real Croak dream could come true at any moment if these factors line up. That's pretty stressful. And it was sort of a joke, but not really. People knew well at this point that Adventure Time was in it for the long game. People did not put it past the show to pull something like this. And in the season 6 finale, Finn and Jake end up at space, and Finn makes multiple explicit references to Jake's Croak dream from 3 seasons ago.
Jake, you okay?
Yeah, man, just don't croak out here.
Jake, no! Don't worry, man. I'm working out a plan. Freaking bing bong. Jake's gonna fulfill his Croak dream after all.
And given that this was the finale of a season that dealt heavily with questions of existentialism and fate, people were freaking out alongside Finn. Was the show going to kill Jake? Thankfully they didn't, but they came pretty damn close. And it was a neat and honestly very nerve-wracking piece of dramatic tension that I haven't really seen executed in the same way anywhere else. Ludo-narrative. And also, since they didn't make good on it, it's still in their quiver should they decide to use it at some point. And it's like, probably not, but also maybe.
Maybe? I don't know. Probably not.
Probably not, but who knows?
It's the perfect dramatic device for an anxious brain to spin on, and the stuff about Finn losing an arm and the inevitability of another cataclysmic event on Earth seemingly every 1,000 years work in the same way. It elicits dread, sometimes for the characters, and crucially, always for the audience. It's just a really unique and fascinating device to me, especially in an ostensibly kids show. Season 7 becomes a little less centralized on a running plot, more like Season 5 in that respect. The beginning of Season 7 starts what is widely considered to be Princess Bubblegum's sort of redemption arc. At the end of Season 6, she's stripped of her princesshood and banished to her Uncle Gumbald's old cabin with only her faithful peppermint butler at her side. The King of Ooze sucks big time and is a total con artist, but the Candy Kingdom was vulnerable to a scam because of legitimate grievances with Princess Bubblegum and her fascistic paternalism. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? It's almost as if... Anyway, the show doesn't position the King of Ooze takeover as a good thing by any means. It's really just the culmination of Princess Bubblegum's misdeeds, and it causes her to hit a rock bottom seasons in the making. In the making for so long, in fact, that a lot of people wondered if she was gradually going to be permanently positioned as an antagonist. But in Season 7, Princess Bubblegum's distance from authority humbles her. She has the time and space to reconnect with Marceline after having their relationship damaged for vague reasons a long time ago. It's clear they both want to reconnect, and they have an undeniable chemistry, but before Season 3, their few interactions were laced with bad blood.
I lost my hat, lost my home, lost my people.
Oh, Bonnie.
I tried. I really, really tried. All I managed to do was push everyone away. I pushed you away. I'm sorry, Marceline. I've been a real dinger to you.
All of these things are steps in the right direction for Bubblegum, and they come to a head in the show's first mini-series, a serialized arc in the first third of Season 7 called Stakes. Stakes is an opportunity for Adventure Time to tell a self-contained story while also advancing its own macro plot, like the arc of Season 6 but on a smaller scale. In Stakes, Marceline decides she doesn't want to be a vampire anymore because she wants to grow up. This decision forces her to reckon with the ghost of her past in the form of the Vampire King and his minions, a group of tarot card-themed vampires who Marceline took down in her troubled past. Finn, Jake, and Princess Bubblegum help Marceline take down the vampires again and confront the Vampire King, who turned Marceline into a vampire in the first place all those years ago. There's a lot of really good Marceline backstory stuff here, and Marceline and Bubblegum get to reconnect more, which, as a proponent of their ship even before what was missing, I was very on board with. The end of Stakes finds Marceline facing down against the Vampire King, who, unlike the other vampires, actually doesn't want to fight. Dovetailing off the vampire's tarot symbolism, the Vampire King describes a phenomenon called the Wheel. He reminds Marceline that she has been alive long enough to see that patterns tend to repeat themselves, but that she doesn't have to be complicit in this, nor does anyone else.
This is the old way. Agents of darkness and light in a tug of war. But now, a creature can step out of that struggle. In this age, why would I want to be the Vampire King anymore? Marceline, I know I was ruthless in the past, but tell me, what's the one thing you've noticed about the world since you beat me all those hundreds of years ago?
Everything repeats over and over again. No one learns anything, because no one lives long enough to see the pattern, I guess.
But you've lived long enough.
I know, duh.
And you still think this is the right way? Fighting me?
The other way's like a black hole, an unknown.
I'm not afraid of the unknown. I have the power to change destiny. Queen of Vampires. You weigh the scales of fate, spill my guts, or face the unknown. Either way, I will not bite. For turning you would subjugate me to the wheel of fortune. And I am a king, not a hamster.
The Vampire King is willing to change with the new world, and encourages Marceline to do the same. Marceline is skeptical, but sees his point and acquiesces. The Vampire King has Princess Bubblegum remove his vampire essence like she did for Marceline. Now, there are no more vampires. All is well for a while until an unintended mishap causes the King's raw essence to be loosed upon the world in the form of a dark cloud monster that starts wrecking everything. Finn, Jake, and Bubblegum are on the attack, with Bubblegum directly saving a bunch of candy citizens and starting to demonstrate her personal changes to her former subjects. But Marceline despairs because the Vampire King's resolve to defy repeating cycles ultimately fell through, and she thinks this reflects badly on her. In Marcy's eyes, her decision to grow up doomed the world, and if the Vampire King couldn't break the cycle, she can't either.
Well, finally did it, big guy. You won. Well played. Just kinda wish you would have gotten it over with 1,000 years ago and saved us all some trouble.
Which is pretty fucking heavy, wow. But then, in one of my favorite moments in the whole show, the Ice King tries to console Marceline.
We're survivors, right? Like cockroaches or rats. Sure, you could fight and try to save the day, but what if you lose? Then what? You could die. Better to run and hide like a rat, right, buddy?
Did you just call me a cockroach, Simon?
What? No. No.
Thanks, buddy.
It was unintentional on Ice King's part, of course, but hearing her own mindset in perspective motivates Marceline to join the fight. Marceline helps defeat the Dark Cloud, but it turns her back into a vampire in the process. Also, Princess Bubblegum's heroic actions in the finale make her former citizens realize that she's the lesser of two evils in comparison to the King of Ooh, and moved by her changes. They reinstate her as Princess of the Candy Kingdom. We've seen by now that Adventure Time has a very interesting relationship with the status quo. A lot about it defies the status quo that cartoons usually return to by default, such as the increasing serialization of events and inconsistent internal logic. It even happens in smaller ways. Adventure Time has always liked to change its characters' outfits a little more than the typical cartoon, and some characters like Finn age in real time, both of which are rather novel for all ages animated shows. Adventure Time is inextricably a media property, one that became something of a cultural icon in its early days, and the typical executive is going to want to keep what works, the status quo, and abandon ideas that are too subversive, or change the established, iconic, merchandisable elements of the show too much. Adventure Time has always visibly strained against that. For as many characters that noticeably change throughout the show, many characters are fixated on maintaining or breaking cycles. Characters like Finn, Marceline, Bubblegum, the Vampire King, and even Lemonhope hinge their arcs on whether or not to perpetuate cycles. And at the end of Stakes, though Marceline turning back into a vampire and Bubblegum regaining princesshood effectively send the show back to its original status quo, the show takes a really nuanced position. If Marceline hadn't experienced what she just did, she might despair about the status quo being upheld. But at the end of Stakes, Marceline decides that cycles only truly repeat themselves if you stay the same internally, and this whole experience did help her accomplish her goal of growing up.
Nah, I'm cool being a vampire again. Being mortal was good. At the same time, it was terrifying. Now I'm a vampire with fresh mortal memories and, I don't know, more empathy or something? More grown up. Bonnie, thank you for helping me grow up. Now I guess we get to hang out together forever.
Stakes echoes some of Season 6 themes about putting the work into your own reality. It's not enough for Princess Bubblegum to feel sorry for her actions. She has to actively save her kingdom in order to earn enough of their trust back to rule again. And Marceline learns it's never too late to get involved, and that at least trying to break vicious cycles is a hell of a lot better than nothing, and not worthless if it doesn't pan out exactly how you want it either. Rebecca Sugar came back to write a song for Stakes called Everything Stays, which is about the sometimes imperceptible changes in things in our lives that may appear the same.
Everything stays right where you left it. Everything stays, but it still changes ever so slightly, daily and nightly, in little ways, when everything stays.
It's a wonderful thesis statement for the arc, and it's great that Rebecca got to come back and do it because they did a lot of Marceline episodes in their time on the show and really helped deepen her character up to this point. A bunch happens in seasons 8 and 9, and I'll spare you from having to hear me explain everything since not all of it leads back to my point. Basically, Finn discovers an archipelago of humans who have survived the war shepherded by his mom, now an android, who he reconnects with after some drama. Susan Strong came from the archipelago and is confirmed to be human as well, 6 seasons later. Also, she's gay, and it's great. Finn's grass arm becomes its own entity, Fern, with all of Finn's memories up to a certain point. Having processed the abandonment of his father in a different and darker way, Fern grows to resent Finn and tries tries to usurp him until Finn accidentally kills him, and there's a whole drama there. The entire world is briefly reverted to the raw elements of fire, ice, candy, and slime, and when everything goes back to normal, Jake finally discovers his alien origins. Toward the end of the show, he reconnects with his biological father, who is trying to literally leech off Jake and his children's youth, and there's another bad paternal figure. The elements thing also causes Princess Bubblegum's abusive Uncle Gumbald to resurface, revealing where a lot of Bubblegum's own abusive tendencies came from, and renewing conflict between her and her uncle that ends in a war. Oddly, though, none of that is super relevant to us right now, at least not yet. Hopefully you've picked up on those cycles of abuse and the concept of personal transformation returning, because they're part of pretty much every major character's story at some point. Man, I haven't talked about BMO hardly at all, who deals with these themes in some of my favorite episodes of the whole show. The episode Be More and the two-part BMO holiday special that takes place after Stakes are brilliant, and they make BMO's role at the end of the show make a lot of sense. Anyway, bookmark all of that for now, because it's time to talk about Graybles. So back in Season 4, there was an episode called 5 Short Graybles, in which 5 vignettes from around the Land of Oo were presented to us by a funny alien guy named Cuber, and we, the audience, are prompted to guess the central theme of the 5 stories from quote-unquote the days of old at the end. It's a super cute framing device and concept for a self-contained episode. Surely it'll stay self-contained and never come back up again, right? No, baby, no. Adventure Time is in it for the long game. There are a bunch more episodes with the Graybles conceit throughout the rest of the show, each one focusing more and more on the framing device of Cuber. The framing device is maybe not so much of a framing device anymore. This comes to a head in the Season 6 episode, Graybles 1000+. If you've been paying attention, the number 1000 already has significance in the Adventure Time world, and only more so after this episode. It opens with Cuber watching a Grayble of one of his own childhood memories. As the other Graybles episodes implied, the Graybles are essentially recordings of the past that Cuber can observe at will. Then we pull out from Cuber's spaceship for the first time in a Graybles episode to discover that Cuber was being incredibly literal when he said the Finn and Jake Graybles were from the days of old. Cuber lives in the distant, ruined future we saw at the end of Lemon Hope, 1,000+ years in the future. The world isn't as lifeless as it appeared in Lemon Hope. There are some aliens heavily implied to be distant descendants of Jake and Lady Rainicorn on the periphery of Earth, and Marceline's cave-bound house is still there, albeit changed. There's also a creepy winged creature that looks like the Ice King's beard. It also has his nose, crown gems, and voice, and will return to the so-called Ice Thing soon. Throughout Graybles 1000+, Cuber uses his Graybles to survive post-apocalyptic Oo, and ultimately makes it back to his ship in one piece. It's sort of about how stories and memories can help us overcome adversity, and it would be a cute story if not for all of the overwhelming dread associated with this setting. Adventure Time reminds us that the Land of Oo has an expiration date, and so do the characters we followed thus far. Cuber uses a Grayble of Jake to find a weapon he buried in front of the treehouse years prior. When Jake buries the item in the past, he says, "Bobble, bobble," and when Cuber uncovers the item, he says, "Bobble, bobble," as the dead might say. It's another example of Jake's mortality in particular being called into question. It stands to reason that very few of the characters we love would survive 1,000+ years into the future, but listen, Cuber, we don't gotta be reminded of it repeatedly. And of course, there's that ice thing. In a way that calls just enough attention to itself, the implications are pretty harsh. If magic still gives you immunity to apocalypses, maybe 1,000 years in the future, this is the Ice King. After all, like dementia or Alzheimer's, the crown's effects are degenerative. If 1,000 years turned Simon into the Ice King, what if another 1,000 turns him into the Ice Thing? And of course, that would mean no one, not Finn and Jake, Marceline, not even Betty, was able to reverse the crown's curse in all that time.
You're gonna be the Ice King till the sun blows up.
It's a really bleak implied end to a character we've really grown to sympathize with, and another reminder that not everyone we care about might make it out of this show alive. Of course, that's just true about life, but it's a clever way to raise the stakes for a cast of characters who some of which live incredibly long natural lives, if not having achieved immortality altogether. Moreover, it's upsetting when put up against later themes of breaking vicious cycles and making your own happy ending that are present in the Season 6 finale and Stakes. What if it is all pointless? The point still stands that time, the great equalizer, makes bastards of us all. We may break or make peace with the cycles of our own lives, but we can't ensure the sanctity of ones that follow us. What enduring effect can we have on the world then? If it's possible to stop the inevitable, why did everyone in Adventure Time seem to only delay it? What's gonna happen to everyone? Are they really gonna do the Ice King dirty like that? Does Jake fulfill his Croak dream after all? And perhaps most danglingly, if Princess Bubblegum took a more benevolent turn starting in Season 7, what the hell caused this apparent war-torn apocalypse? Candy architecture and ships with UG on them were involved. Pre-Season 7 Bubblegum may have had the militaristic brazenness to unwittingly plunge the world into an apocalyptic war, but it seems like she's changed. What if this means the change not only didn't stick, but that it eventually doomed everyone in the process? The crew of Adventure Time gives anxious fans just enough breadcrumbs implications to catastrophize with, implications that, if ran with, yield darkness. I think that's by design. They want you to fear for the worst and hope for the best. It keeps a fire at your back that moves the plot forward even as it meanders. I've never seen a piece of media do this with such nuance and on such a big time scale, both in and out of universe. Remember, the story may have already spanned thousands of years, but the show's been on for nearly 10, and longer than any other show on Cartoon Network at the time. Adventure Time posits optimistic themes about redemption and breaking abusive cycles, but it never lets that doubt, that dread, leave your mind. Not till the very end. Now it's time to talk about me, because the only thing I like more than mansplaining cartoons to an audience is self-indulgence. I watched Adventure Time from the very beginning, but I didn't start paying attention until the Season 3 episode What Was Missing. I saw it during a marathon on Cartoon Network shortly after it aired, and my budding teenage mind was really picking up what they were putting down. I consider it the beginning of the shift into that teenage angst era of the show I'd mentioned earlier, and the energy really resonated with me. I caught up with the episodes I'd missed and was rewarded with a lot of fun callbacks and returning characters / lore elements, and I followed a lot of people on Tumblr that picked up on those things too. Then I watched the end of Season 3 and the whole rest of the show unfold in real time, with an online community who, like me, were speculating, theory crafting, and poring over interviews and weekly one-sentence TV guide synopses for upcoming episodes. I mentioned earlier that the crew of Adventure Time maintained a prolific production blog, and that was extremely fun to dive into as well. A huge aspect of that was promo art, pieces often done by the storyboard artist meant to advertise upcoming episodes. Sometimes aspects of these pieces of promo art would only make sense after you saw the episode, or foreshadow something. A particularly sparse or out of context piece of promo art would elicit anxiety from fans online, and in general, you were never really sure when something really intense was going to happen in the show's macro plot, so any inclination one way or the other was something I read into a lot. The King of Oot Tumblr also has model and prop sheets, storyboard samples, and sometimes storyboards for full episodes, and that kind of production transparency was fun to look at, novel for an American animation industry that is notoriously pretty secretive, and for me, it really made me want to pursue a career in storyboarding. Like I said earlier, Adventure Time was a board-driven show, and you could sometimes compare full episodes to their full storyboards and see that the overseas studios have stuck to them really close. It helped me educate myself about the process and fall in love with how much control the artists had on board-driven shows, especially ones as out there as Adventure Time. They maintained the blog even through the Distant Lands sequel series, and at time of recording, it's still online, and if you like the show or animation production, I really recommend checking it out. I'm extremely thankful it existed and served as an amazing, completely staff-maintained companion piece to the show. On that note, they should really pay board artists for doing promo art. It's free labor and free advertising that should really be compensated for. But yeah, I grew up with Finn. We were the same age for a long time, and we went through major breakups at the same time. Thankfully, I have a pretty good relationship with my dad, but I know plenty of people who don't, and seeing cycles of abuse in the lives of Adventure Time characters felt similar to seeing them in my friends' lives. A lot of my friends were really miserable over things they couldn't control and people who were abusing and neglecting them. It wasn't happening to me, but I took it to heart, and it hurt to watch them struggle. Adventure Time felt like an absurdist, heightened version of that, and in either of those situations, I didn't want to feel like I was helpless to alleviate it. I didn't want to be Jake stuck in the time room watching Farmworld Finn break down. I didn't want to despair like Marceline in the shadow of the dark cloud. We help the people in our lives the best we can. Sometimes we're helpless to stop the wheel. You could probably tell I'm a pretty anxious person. For better and for worse, and often for worse, I projected a lot of my anxiety onto my dog, Boo. I loved him more than anything, and he had been in my life for most of it. We got him when I was in the 3rd grade, and we had him until I was in my 2nd year of college. He couldn't talk or shapeshift, but he was my buddy all the same, and whenever even the most minor something would happen to him, I'd kinda lose it, because I knew he couldn't tell me if something was wrong. That's something that always bugged me about animals, but something you just have to live with. I had a really hard time doing that. It felt similar to how Finn obsessed over Jake's Croak dream, and how the show subtly hung it over our heads ever after. We dread the end of joy, and we know it'll come one way or the other, but ideally we want it to come on agreeable terms. I got so used to Boo being in my life and so obsessed over his safety that I had self-fulfilled my own prophecy. It would ruin me when he left, no matter how it happened. In July of 2018, Adventure Time was on the cusp of its own ending. Nearly 10 years of this wild story were about to come to some sort of a head, and all the while there was the possibility and even distinct implication that it would be a very dark one. By the end of the last season, Betty has adopted Magic Man's magic, and therefore madness, on a quest to repair the Ice Crown. She and Simon have now firmly and tragically switched places, with Betty's sanity now deteriorating in a desperate bid to save her love. The Ice King, not understanding the situation in full, but also eventually feeling rightfully pretty dehumanized by the whole situation, wants Betty to love him for who he is now rather than who he was. Betty is told a few times that Simon is gone. In one of the penultimate episodes of Adventure Time, Temple of Mars, Betty resolves to summon Golb, a mysterious deity only mentioned a few times in the show who bears a striking resemblance to Glob and appears to have the remnants of a time room orbiting his body in an attempt to save Simon. And even though it's mostly framed as bad that she's doing this, you feel for Betty. It's sort of a break the cycle situation, and ideally, of course, we'd all want her to save him, but it's already costed her her sanity and well-being, and cosmically, it seems like their roles may continue to switch for the worse.
Simon,
I've been trying so hard to help you. I've tried reprogramming your crown, code mapping, penguin napping, co-mingling with magic, and grasping and grappling, but it just hasn't been happening. It's saddening, it's maddening, and I'm rapping, and... So I'm trying the direct approach.
We as the audience also have the Ice Thing and the Lemon Hope future in the back of our minds. The penultimate episode reminds us of this again by having a small version of the Ice Thing plague Betty in her trials on Mars, an eerie echo of the future that only the audience can recognize for what it is. During the events of Temple of Mars, Jake is also alone in space in a life-threatening situation, and so the show continues to subtly evoke the Croak dream. It won't let you forget. It'll make you see the signs whether you want to or not. Also terrifyingly, the last few episodes before the series finale set up an all-out war between Princess Bubblegum and her uncle Gumbald. Gumbald was bringing out the worst in his niece, and Bubblegum was starting to echo her old ways. She became militaristic and paranoid as Gumbald threatened her candy kingdom with a stronghold of its own. Princess Bubblegum was doubting her progress and taking her uncle's bait, and if Gumbald was to face destruction, he would make it mutually assured.
By building an army, he's forcing my hand.
It seems to me that all these rhubarbs down through history don't do nobody no good.
Finn, we all love how sweet you are, but sometimes we just have to buckle down and do things the ugly way.
She'll have her cake and eat it too, because she'll be dead. The cake makes her dead.
Ooh was on the brink of war, and again, people noticed the signs. In the Lemon Hope, Graybles 1000 Plus future, the warship said UG, Uncle Gumbald. What if the apocalypse we see 1,000 years later was caused by the conflict mounting between Princess Bubblegum and her uncle in the present? What if Princess Bubblegum can't surpass her old ways after all, succumbing to the same cycle of abuse and hubris that landed Earth in crisis so many years ago, and that ended Gunther and Evergreen's prehistoric world as well? The oncoming war was even dubbed the Great Gum War by Gumbald, unknowingly echoing the previous Great Mushroom War that plunged the world into nuclear waste. The end of Adventure Time was lining up to be a dark one. All the upsetting implications were starting to converge. Was everyone going to be okay? What would it mean for me if they weren't? Also in July 2018, I went on vacation to San Francisco. San Diego Comic-Con was happening at the time, and I was watching a YouTube video of the final Adventure Time panel in my hotel room. All that was left in the show at this point was the finale, and this panel served to hype that up and send off Adventure Time's presence at the convention. Toward the end of the panel, Rebecca Sugar came on stage and previewed a new song she wrote for the as-of-yet unseen Adventure Time finale. She'd perform it totally out of context, not revealing what character in the finale sings that song. The song was called Time Adventure, a fun switcheroo. As a fan of Sugar in general and her previous return to the show in the Stakes song Everything Stays, I was stoked. It was fitting for her to shepherd Adventure Time out one last time. Time Adventure is working on a ton of different levels. It's a tender consolation to the end of a relationship, or a life. It's also totally Rebecca Sugar memorializing her time working on Adventure Time. The lyrics reference hanging each moment up in pictures on the wall, inside a billion tiny frames, just so we can see it all. In a literal sense, that's what the act of storyboarding is. You draw each moment of the show, and back when Rebecca was working on Adventure Time, a lot of people were still drawing on sticky notes and board paper, so often they would pitch episodes by hanging each storyboard up on a wall and going through it beat by beat. It's meta. At that Comic-Con, she's literally singing the song to her former board partners, saying goodbye to the show where she got her start. It's pretty amazing, and I picked up on all of that at the time, but it was hard to really listen to what the song had to say because I was too preoccupied with the implications within the context of the show itself. It's a song about someone saying goodbye, a comforting consolation of a goodbye, but a farewell nonetheless. I had made up my mind. In the finale, someone was gonna die. Maybe it was Jake?
Bobble, bobble, as the dead might say.
After all, Adventure Time only had one more episode to make good on Jake's Croak dream, and the show had evoked it again not too long ago. Finn and Jake's relationship is central to the show, and if anyone was to get a whole song memorializing an important relationship, I figured it would be Jake, with his zen acceptance of fate fueling a comforting attitude. I lowered my phone, and my parents asked me how the Adventure Time thing was. Pretty good, I said. Jesus Christ, I think Jake is gonna die. A few days after I got back from San Francisco, Boo died. It happened over the course of 24 hours, apropos of basically nothing, for reasons we'll never know for sure. Probably a stroke, but there's no way to know. I slept on the couch, and he died in my father's arms a few feet in front of me the next morning. It was brutal and traumatic, and a realization of my worst anxieties. In the back of my mind, and sometimes very much in the front of my mind, I always wondered, what if I lost him? Even though it's unlikely, what if I lost him unexpectedly? I lost him unexpectedly. So specific were my fears, and with such pinpoint accuracy were they confirmed. Don't let anyone tell you losing a pet doesn't hurt, man. Even if you didn't spend most of your life and many hours in therapy toxically hyperfixating on the nature of his inevitable demise. It was really hard. Adventure Time had been in my life for almost as long as Boo had, and there was only one episode left. It was slated to premiere on Labor Day 2018, and Boo died at the end of July. No matter how something ends, if it's done a good job getting you invested, you'll mourn its ending. It feels unforgiving when a good thing ends. After Boo, I tried not to bank on things so much anymore, but I was kind of banking on Adventure Time not ending in the incredibly bleak way it was positioned to. Its themes of overcoming vicious cycles really helped me out, and I wanted the same for them. I didn't think it was going to ruin me if not, but it would definitely be salt in the wound. I didn't want to watch another dog I love die. Let the dog live. Hashtag let the dog live. Years of narrative dread and emotional projection preceded September 3rd. The finale was a 4-parter, which meant 44 minutes to wrap up all these crazy plot threads into something resembling a bow. The episode opens in the Lemon Hope / Graybles 1000 plus version of Ooh, ruined as ever but more lively than we've seen it before, following new characters Shermie and Beth. Beth is a distant relative of Jake and Lady Rainicorn and a disgraced pup princess, and Shermie bears a striking resemblance to Finn. He's got animal ears and Season 1 Finn's brimming optimism. They uncover a robot arm in the rubble. It's Finn's, rusted and disembodied. Oh fucking boy. The unfortunate implications here are somewhat allayed when Shermie suggests they take the arm to the current king of Ooh, who is none other than Bimo. Our Bimo, still kicking it 1,000 years later. He's living in a shrine full of Adventure Time callbacks. We see Glob's helmet, several princess crowns, Ice King's drums, and a ton more obscure Easter eggs that, along with Bimo's continued survival, provide a little optimism for the preservation of familiar things in this new world, but that ultimately have the same feeling as remnants of the Mushroom War, relics that will eventually be overtaken by the Earth and made unrecognizable by time and further cataclysms. Bimo tells Shermie and Beth the story of the Great Gum War and the end of Ooh, and that's our framing device for the episode. We cut back to our present-day Ooh, and Princess Bubblegum is preparing for war. Finn and Jake's attempt to de-escalate the situation from the previous episode fell flat, and Finn fears that this war might end everybody. Finn isn't the only one, as Marceline attempts to persuade Princess Bubblegum out of fighting too.
I just want to ask you to reconsider. I mean, I don't like to flaunt my suffering cred, but I've lived through something like this once before. And I'm just not really trying to help start that all up again.
Princess Bubblegum blows her off, then backtracks a little and does so gently. Some of her personal changes still stuck, and she's clearly not full war mode yet, but she's damn close.
Nah, man. She's wrong. This is all wrong. Even if she wins now, this is never gonna end. I can feel it.
Right before the fighting begins, Finn, Jake, Bubblegum, Gumbald, and Fern all enter a shared nightmare. Right before the whole Elements thing, Finn and Jake got a bottle of nightmare juice via shenanigans, and Jake unleashes it upon them all as a last-ditch effort to avoid the war. In the nightmare world, Finn and Fern battle hallucinations and reconcile, and Bubblegum and Gumbald realize they've both hurt each other. See, Princess Bubblegum made Gumbald, her Aunt Lolly, and her cousin Cheeklay to be her guardians. She had no family of her own, so she decided to build one. But as young Princess Bubblegum tried to build the Candy Kingdom, Gumbald imposed his vision for the kingdom over her own. When Bubblegum refused to let him do this, Gumbald became vindictive and abusive, plotting to subvert his niece by dousing her in Dum-Dum Juice, a serum that turns candy people simple-minded and docile, and threatening to kill her brother Nettie. Princess Bubblegum douses them in the serum instead, turning them into the Season 1 background characters Crunchy, Manfred, and Punchy. Princess Bubblegum and Gumbald's roles in their conflict are certainly not equal, as Gumbald definitely took it too far after a certain point, but their feud originated from Princess Bubblegum not respecting her uncle's vision for a candy kingdom, which he wants to impose on her now by winning the war. Everyone wakes up and Princess Bubblegum apologizes to her uncle. Unfortunately, Gumbald is about to set off an attack behind her back before Aunt Lolly stops him by dousing him in the Dum-Dum Juice again. Sometimes bad dads stay bad. Anyway, it seems like the war has been subverted, and you think that the Shermie and Beth apocalypse must have been from something else. But then Golb shows up.
2 Candy Kingdoms it is! Hooray!
And so, in the end, they decided not to have the big fight.
Oh, so you meant like the end of the war. I thought you meant like the end of the world.
No. That happened next.
See, in one of the penultimate episodes before this, Betty resolved to summon Golb in a bid to save Simon. It works, but Golb begins an assault on the two armies by creating horrible organic monsters. Betty is stuck in a trance after summoning Golb, and as they defend against the monsters, Finn and company try to snap her out of it. Ultimately, it's Ice King who does it, and it causes an emotional explosion that sends he and Betty flying into Golb's open mouth. Finn jumps in after them as Golb's mouth closes, losing his robot arm one last time in the process. And there it stayed for over 1,000 years. You start to realize that maybe the Gum War didn't cause the Shermie and Beth apocalypse. Maybe it was Golb. More evidence that the cataclysm being Golb's doing is stacked when everything starts going terribly wrong. Golb's creepy organic monsters ravage the landscape and destroy Finn and Jake's treehouse, downing Jake and Bimo in the process. A monster also nearly kills Princess Bubblegum until Marceline swoops in to save her, and after many seasons of stifling due to censors, Bonnie and Marcy's romantic relationship crescendos into an on-screen kiss.
Even back when we weren't talking, I was so afraid something bad would happen to you and I wouldn't be there to protect you, and I don't want to lose you again.
Hey, I'm a tough gum. Nothing never happening to me. Never.
I know, Girl, you phrased that so weird.
I might have a concussion.
I could make a whole video about these two and their thousands of years of slow burn gay angst, but it was very gratifying to watch their relationship finally take shape. It's a shame that it has to be in the finale like in Korra and She-Ra, but at that point Steven Universe recently had Ruby and Sapphire's wedding, which was a landmark in queer representation on animated TV as a whole, but on Cartoon Network in particular. Rebecca and the Steven crew fought hard to incorporate that overt, virtually uncensorable moment of queer love, not coded in technicalities or subtext whatsoever. And after that, the network was literally like, well, it's impossible to deny we're bigots anymore if we start obfuscating shit after this. Overt queer love is fully sanctioned on our network now, I guess. Also, unlike Korra and She-Ra, there was technically a little more show after this, in the form of the Distant Lands Obsidian special. It fills in a lot of the gaps of Marceline and Princess Bubblegum's history that were either intentionally vague or left unexamined because of queer censorship. With that ground covered, we also see how their relationship is informed by trauma, something both these characters have in spades. It's a great episode. Back to the finale, though, the scariest part is that Golb starts digesting Finn, Ice King, and Betty, reverting the latter two to past versions of themselves. The good news is that this does what Betty summoned Golb to accomplish. It turns Ice King back into Simon, and it presumably cures Betty of her magic madness as well. But none of that matters because they're about to die. The walls of Golb's innards are closing in on the three of them. Simon and Betty finally together again, if only for a moment. Finn sighs.
I always figured I'd go out saving somebody.
It's really fucked up. Feels like the grimdark finale I'd been dreading was really materializing in this moment. And most finales do this. Most stories with 3-act structures do this. There's a moment or moments toward the climax where all hope seems lost, so the storytellers can bring it to some resolution, good or bad. But in Adventure Time's finale, there's the weight of thousands of years of portentous canon, and 9 years of carefully crafted, odd, and wonderful, and very human character development on top of it. And compounding everything, for me, was my own baggage I was bringing into it. My dog, childhood manifestations of anxiety and depression, past relationships, and half my life of watching a really weird cartoon that made me believe that really interesting, subversive things could be made on mainstream animated television, and that maybe I could make some of it too. As everything goes to hell, we cut to Jake, battered in the ruins of the treehouse. He's inconsolable at the loss of his home. He and Finn had overcome so much, only for everything they'd worked for to be taken down so quickly and easily by something they had barely anything to do with. What's worse is that Jake is alone, and while he doesn't make any explicit references to it himself, and also he's still earthbound and sans Banana Man's company, you have to think that in the back of his mind is his Croak dream. Back when his Croak dream first came to him, Jake's life was pretty idyllic. Jake is zen under extreme circumstances in general, but it's been overall pretty great for a while now. Can Jake accept his death under these circumstances? In this quiet moment, Bimo crawls out of the wreckage, his screen cracked.
It's okay, Jake. You always try to protect me and Finn, but sometimes we are going to get hurt. How about today, you let me be the papa?
Then he sings, and the mystery that last Comic-Con panel posited is answered.
Time is an illusion that helps things make sense. So we are always living in the present tense. It seems unforgiving when a good thing ends. But you and I will always be back then.
Happening happened, will happen, happening happened, and will happen again and again. 'Cause you and I will always be back then.
I haven't touched on Bimo much in this video, and I thought now might be a good time so I can highlight how much it makes sense that Bimo is the one who sings Time Adventure. Bimo is Finn and Jake's little robot video game console friend. He's very cute and good, and as his pre-song dialogue implies, Finn and Jake are kind of his guardians. Every major character in Adventure Time has character arcs connected to growing up, or personal change, or both, and Bimo is no exception. Seasons 5 and 7 are big for Bimo in particular. The Season 5 episode, Bimo Lost, is Bimo's first major episode on his own, wherein he finds himself far away from the treehouse with a similarly cracked screen and having to take care of a bubble and a giant baby. Bimo grapples with guardianship of the giant baby, nearly dies, and falls in love with the bubble before it abruptly pops to end the episode. You'd think it's just a dark joke until the Bimo Holiday 2-parter in Season 7 has Bimo talk to Air. Although it can't respond, the implication is that Bimo just does this sometimes, and it's sort of like praying, communing with his lost love.
Air? Are you there, Air? It's me, Bimo. I know it's been a long time since we talked. Sorry about that. But well, maybe if you don't want to talk, you could just listen.
The Season 5 episode Be More has BMO put in serious danger once again as his programming is on the fritz. Finn and Jake discover the factory where BMO was made and taken there, dodging obstacles and eventually meeting Mo, an almost completely cybernetic human who survived the Mushroom War and has been living in his abandoned factory, kept alive by the robots with whom he shares his name. BMO is a special Mo robot. He was created to take care of Mo's son, but Mo never ended up having a son, probably due to the war killing almost everybody but him. Fucked up. So he sent BMO into the world to find a family of his own. BMO was made to be a caretaker, but not necessarily in a paternal sense. He was meant to be a playmate, and his programming to emulate kindness and empathy. BMO was built to give love.
BMO's one of a kind. I built BMO to take care of my son, but I guess I never ended up dating any women. So that's sad. I sent BMO off into the world alone, hoping to find a family alone. Maybe even find somebody else's little boy to take care of. I must have built what like a mini Mo's, but BMO is very, very special. I built BMO to understand fun and how to play. You see, I made BMO to be more.
In Season 7 is one of my favorite episodes of the show, in which Mo, now in a completely robotic body, sends BMO on a solo journey to the Mo factory as a birthday rite of passage. BMO's internal conflict in this episode, and in many ways throughout the show, involves growing up. Though BMO was meant to be a caretaker of sorts himself, he's stuck in a state of arrested development like a lot of other immortal or undead characters on the show. Never aging naturally because he's a robot, but having been built with human sensibilities. When you tell a robot built to play its whole life to grow up, how does it do that? BMO wonders if growing up will change him or even make Finn and Jake stop loving him, a sentiment that had been echoed in the previous episodes, the Stakes miniseries, and many places elsewhere throughout the show.
Mo told me if I do this thing, I'll be a grown-up. And that sounds cool, I guess. But then, if I change, will Finn and Jake still love me? Will I still love them? But does growing up just change your body? Or also your soul?
BMO makes it to the Mo factory and finds it abandoned, rigged with death traps designed for him specifically, and all the other Mo's forced to amalgamate into the All-Mo, a nightmarish, trash-compacted hive mind made from a forced mass suicide. Pretty fucked up! BMO discovers that the robot Mo is actually his long-lost predecessor, Amo, who, when confronted, nearly kills BMO until BMO reacts in self-defense and accidentally kills Amo instead. There's some real Cain and Abel stuff going on here, and it is, again, pretty fucked up. BMO's emotional crisis in this episode comes after he kills Amo and reckons with what this means for him. Was this his coming of age or his turn to evil?
Mo is gone now, so if there is anything he wanted to teach me, better be in me already. I guess all I can do is listen to the heart Mo gave me. Except that's what Amo did, and he turned out bad. So what if I turn out bad too?
BMO concludes that if he has to live without Mo's guidance, he'll have to grow up on terms he thinks are right, and he knows that those aren't and will never be the same as Amo's.
Amo could not think outside his programming and was blinded. But your imagination lets you see the world how it could be.
But I'm different. It's not just Mo up here, it's me too. And if I cannot trust in Mo, I can trust in me.
As someone who also feels stuck in a state of arrested development at times, a lot of Adventure Time's character arcs hit me. Stakes had just used Marceline's immortality and the cycles of violence in its universe to make a poignant statement about maintaining agency and embracing change even when one's world seems superficially the same, and while vicious cycles you can't control span in your periphery. I was graduating high school when Stakes aired, and I needed to hear that. I was applying for art schools but not confident in my ability to get into any of them, and without many alternative options, I was about to either enter a period of extreme change or extreme stagnation, and I didn't know what either meant for me. The BMO Holiday 2-parter put a lovely little bow on that same sentiment for me, and during a time where I really needed it. Adventure Time had been doing that service for years at that point, but things were really taking shape in seasons 5 through 7. I was seeing long-term patterns I didn't have the life experience to see for myself yet. Maybe they'd end up good, maybe they'd end in disaster. This section was also supposed to be about how it really makes sense for BMO to assign time adventures, and there's other reasons too. BMO has served as a sort of moral compass in Adventure Time since early days. He's silly and operates on his own, sometimes warped logic, but he'll often have these wonderful, simple little platitudes to offer that read like a particularly good children's book.
When bad things happen, I know you want to believe they are a joke. But sometimes life is scary and dark. That is why we must find the light.
I think in a lot of ways, BMO is Adventure Time functioning as a quote-unquote kids show at its most distilled form. Plenty of other characters do this too at points, particularly Jake, but these moments from BMO specifically represent the show getting right down to basics, accessible to kids while being prescient to all ages. And so too does Time Adventure represent the last major tentpole in BMO's character arc, from child to grown-up to caretaker, and later to king. Faced with death, BMO has come of age. It's time for him to be the papa this time. Time Adventure, a song about simultaneity and ostensibly about Rebecca Sugar's time working on the show, saves the day in the finale.
My art is a weapon!
In some ways, it's cliché, but it's wonderful. The show frames the song's power as being the harmony to Golb's discord, but I also think that Golb kind of represents nothing, while relationships and putting the work into your own neat reality are arguably framed as the most important things in the show. Golb means nothing, but everyone's connection to each other means something, and the force of that changes fate and carves its way into Golb's being, freeing Finn, Simon, and Betty. The Ice Crown was also digested by Golb and thus reverted to a previous version of itself. The power to grant the wearer's greatest wish, with which it was made, is restored. All Simon and Betty ever wanted was to keep each other safe, but either the Crown's wish magic or the nature of their relationship, or I guess both, are so poisoned by dramatic irony that there's always some catch. This happens one final time when Betty wishes for the power to keep Simon safe, and without the ability to surpass nothing in power, Betty instead herself becomes nothing. She fuses with Golb and zooms away, and Simon is safe, along with everyone else. It's pretty fucked up as per usual, but at least Simon and Betty got to be themselves together again for a second. As a kicker to the averted apocalypse, Gunther puts on the Ice Crown. Jake panics, reminding everyone that Gunther is the Elder Beast Overlord, but like his prehistoric namesake, Gunther's greatest wish was to be like the Ice King, and so he turns into the Ice Thing. So what we see in the Graybles future is not Simon in a tragic apex state of mental and physical degradation after all. Instead, it's Gunther, which is still kind of a bummer, but arguably much better for the Land of Ooh going forward, particularly because it seems like Gunther's Orgalorgness has been neutralized by the Crown, and the entity that was the Ice King gets to live on in some form outside of Simon. Fern dies, and later he's reborn as a new treehouse, implying that the towering tree in the Graybles future is him in some form.
Hey Finn, I'm not doing so good.
Oh no.
Yeah. I just wish I could see the treehouse one more time.
Yeah, dude, of course. Let's go there right now.
That's okay. Just promise to plant me there.
Princess Bubblegum thanks Finn for choosing non-violence, and remarks that he's getting taller, with a kiss on the cheek. It's an echo of images from the beginning of the show, as well as an acknowledgement of growth. Will happen, happening, happened. Then, the Adventure Time finale pulls its most radical feat. We snap back to our framing device in the Graybles future.
That's the end.
I thought this story was about the end of Ooh.
Pretty much.
But what happened to Phil and Jake after that?
Or Princess Bubblegum?
You know, they kept living their lives.
They kept living their lives. We were never entitled to watch the tragic ends of these cartoon characters. Maybe we were never entitled to see their ends at all, good or bad. Sometimes the worst case scenario doesn't happen, even when all signs point to yes. When Boo died, the worst case scenario basically did happen. My irrational fear of him dying in pain for some unknown reason some random day was made rational. It didn't have 9 seasons of red herring foreshadowing behind it, but my anxiety sure as hell made it feel like it did. All those fears were confirmed and made present. I didn't know how much I needed to see a worst case scenario prophetically telegraphed, subverted. It reminded me that Boo dying didn't prove all my anxieties right. It couldn't. Sometimes the dog dies. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes everything's fine. And either way, you and I will always be back then. We see the Adventure Time world cycles play out, but with more neutrality than they were once portentously presented to us with. The show always presented cycles of rebirth and repetition, but at the show's climax, a lot of them had been telegraphed as going south, potentially much quicker than the typically long timescale would imply. It's true that cycles missing the proper context and reflection repeat in negative ways in Adventure Time. It's the crux of the Lich's reincarnation, it's the crux of Shoko's reincarnation into Finn, and it's what drives the Vampire King to go in the opposite trajectory. I think if there's a moral here, it's that sometimes history repeats whether we let it or not, and sometimes that can be cruel. But sometimes it can be neutral or even good. After none of Adventure Time's many apocalypses has life altogether ceased. The compulsion for it to do so is always looming, but it never succeeds, in spite of its determined trickery. As long as we put the work in, that kind of abject evil will never succeed. The wheel still turns, but using hindsight that doesn't ignore the present, we have the power to steer our futures in positive directions. It didn't feel to me like Adventure Time avoided death. I think it confronted it many times, and the finale was as good a way as any to confront death while also radically subverting years of dread associated with it. 3 years after the main show ended, Adventure Time would do it again, but a little more head-on. The Distant Lands series takes place all over the Adventure Time timeline, each only distinguishable in their implicit relationship to past episodes rather than a named year or anything like that. The announcement for Distant Lands was just a poster of all the characters together and some episode descriptions, and that was it. My first thought upon seeing this poster was, oh sweet, Adventure Time in space, and that all the characters were in the same place at the same time by virtue of them occupying the same physical space in the poster. True to Time Adventure's theme of simultaneity, though, the 4 episodes are all over the map in both time and space. BMO turns out to have taken place before BMO even met Finn and Jake. Obsidian is set some years after the finale, where Princess Bubblegum and Marceline still don't visibly age, but Finn is an adult, and Wizard City is sometime after the finale, but presumably before Together Again for Peppermint Butler-related reasons. Together Again was going to be the last Distant Lands special after Wizard City, but they switched the two's order, and I can't really fathom why. Together Again is arguably even more finale-y than the main show's finale, and nothing really happens in Wizard City to recontextualize anything that happens in Together Again, or any other part of the show, as Adventure Time is sometimes wont to do. I'm sure the network just wanted to get to the fireworks factory. Granted, pretty much everything else they did in relation to Distant Lands, and what they let Adventure Time get away with in general, was very un-Narc-like. Surprisingly based. During the main show's run, sometimes it felt like the network stopped paying super close attention after the early seasons and just let the rest of the show ride. I'm sure reality was far from this, but it feels like a noteworthy cultural moment. And it wasn't even a moment, it was a whole decade, that a major network basically let an indie comic run for 9 seasons on TV. Man, if I was better educated, I could talk about how much indie comics DNA is in this show, and how that's rippled out in the modern animation industry in really cool ways. Sue Kim, Jesse Moynihan, Steve Wolfhard, Tom Herpich. Wow. Discovering everyone's individual careers from the show and the production blog was a blast. Okay, tangent over with the point that if you like art, looking into the people who work on the animated TV you like is a gift that keeps on giving. The first genius thing about Together Again was its marketing. In the days before HBO Max, Cartoon Network shows leaked a lot. It had something to do with their internal servers, and I think the iTunes mirrors of the episodes, but Adventure Time and Steven Universe episodes in particular leaked ahead of their scheduled air dates all the time, which was problematic for those shows in particular because of their reliance on continuity. I think shows with that sort of in-between level of serialization were rare enough at the time that the network maybe didn't feel like they needed to keep as tight a lock on stuff. Maybe people in those positions who didn't watch the shows were like, oh yeah, these are cartoons and they essentially reset every week. It's not the end of the world if it leaks. Leaks in the age of streaming services still happen, but it seems noticeably harder. Either way, don't watch anything leaked if you can help it, and don't spoil leaked stuff anywhere online before the intended air date, and even after that. All the Distant Lands episodes were able to be marketed very intentionally, with trailers, posters, and logos for each episode, which was rare. They were pretty much like movies, each being as long as the finale, or 4 normal episodes. Together Again's trailer and everything else associated with it was incredibly vague. The trailer didn't even use that many clips from the episode itself, instead advertising it as the first time we've seen Finn and Jake together in a while. The new clips that were there looked very season 1, as did the extended clip they posted ahead of the air date. Just a classic Ice King kidnapping princesses scenario, very early days. For all intents and purposes, it seemed like they were just going back to basics with this one. It would be a well-earned return to form. Adventure Time had been pretty off the wall relative to its original premises a long time now, and arguably it was never really on the wall to begin with, and so I'm sure it would have been refreshing to just have a standard, lighter episode with a full length. But something I and other Adventure Time likers had learned from the main show's run and from other serialized animated shows like Steven Universe was that trailers, clips, and especially TV guide synopses were intentionally misleading, often obfuscating much more sinister scenarios to ridiculous degrees. The more vague the given synopsis and or promo art, the higher chance that something fucked up would happen, and now it was happening again, true to form, long after what we assumed was the last time. Together Again starts in that Season 1-esque scenario from the trailer. Finn and Jake are eating ice cream, Ice King kidnaps some princesses, banter ensues as Finn and Jake save them. The whole thing is resolved in a few minutes and the pair return home, only for Jake to crawl into an open grave and melt as Finn screams, and the whole scenario breaks down as a hallucination.
No! This isn't happening! Not now! Not again!
The episode's faux title card, previously established as Finn and Jake, abruptly changes to Finn and Jake are dead, and it turns out pretty much everything in the trailer was from that first few minutes. Adventure Time has pulled another one on us. Yup, we're here now. We're killing the dog. I'm ready for this, right? I'm gonna be okay? At the point Together Again aired, it's been 3 years since the main show ended and since Boo died. I graduated college just a few days before the episode dropped, so again, it felt like the show was syncing up with my life milestones in weird ways. The themes of simultaneity in Everything Stays and time adventure are prescient at many points in my life. They come to mind again as, at the time the episode dropped, it had been almost a year since we adopted Harper. She looks a lot like Boo, and Boo looked a lot like our previous dog Scout, and there's definitely something psychologically weird there that we as a family are aware of, but lampshade nonetheless because, everything stays. It's freaky sometimes at certain angles when she's laying on the floor, sometimes in that spot on the floor, how easily the warmth of nostalgia can melt away. Together Again takes place long after the finale, long after Obsidian, and Finn has kept living his life until he just stopped, seemingly of natural causes. We're not entitled to know how Finn and Jake died. Maybe Jake fulfilled his Croak dream, and maybe he didn't. That's ultimately none of our business. But the point is that Finn has lived a full life, and it's over now. He's entered the Dead Worlds, a concept briefly explored in the main show, but not explained with the depth of Adventure Time's greater cosmology. Now, 3 years after the main show ended, and with an entirely new storyboard team, Distant Lands goes into it. I love this show. Basically, Finn dies, and in an afterlife populated by familiar faces, he immediately goes searching for Jake. In the Dead Worlds, Finn gets to look like any of his previous selves and is set to experience a presumably unpunished afterlife, but Finn is absolutely single-minded in reuniting with Jake. It's also implied that most people can choose to reincarnate into a new life at basically any time, a choice that Finn probably has as well, but he forgoes it for Jake. He's not doing it without him. We don't know how long Finn has lived without Jake up to the point of his death, or exactly how long Finn has lived in general, but he looks really old. I don't know how much dog ears factor into Jake's unique genetic situation. It doesn't even really matter. I get it. There are a lot of people and pups I'd like to see. There are plenty I would go speak to the Dead World's manager just to commune with, like Finn does. But the Dead Worlds are now ruled by New Death, performed excellently by Chris Fleming. New Death is reckless, macho, and basically a frat bro with daddy issues. Again, with the daddy issues. Finn's dealt with a lifetime of guys like this and has had quite enough. Finn spites death itself and ventures to the other Dead Worlds to find Jake. He discovers Jake is in the 50th Dead World, and in this, the show follows up on the whole Jake switching places with Abraham Lincoln in the afterlife thing back in Sons of Mars. Remember that? The 50th Dead World is a place of Buddhist-adjacent oneness. You get there by not wanting to be there, something that suits Jake's Zen personality even if he didn't take Lincoln's gambit. This Zen barrier applies to everyone, even New Death. He's trying to access the 50th Dead World for reasons as of yet unknown, and even he's not allowed. Of course, Finn can't abide by this rule, or most externally imposed rules for that matter. His one goal, maybe for the rest of eternity, is to be with Jake again. Finn had some trouble surrendering to the nature of the universe before, especially when he's had to advance. The Season 3 episode, Another Way, is about Finn staunchly going about a task his way and hurting a lot of people in the process.
Anyway, that's it. There's no other way around, you dummy.
But I need to get across.
Listen what I'm telling you. There's no way. Ugly tramp.
And the Season 7 episode Hall of Egress is Finn repeatedly failing to exit a dungeon and eventually succeeding by stripping himself of all conventional methods of escape, including sight and basically any sorts of landmarks relative to the dungeon itself. The moral of these stories is ostensibly give up your ego. I've seen some people say that Finn's single-mindedness toward finding Jake is out of character when put up against episodes like these, but I think Finn is a little more complicated and human than that. After all, consider stakes. It's about ending vicious cycles, even when change is so incremental as to be imperceptible. And consider the message of the Comet and Season 6 as a whole. The Comet could have allowed Finn to experience full ego death by ascending to a new plane, but Finn chooses the connections he's fostered. The familiar is more important than the vague transcendent, something that Martin neglects and is framed as selfish for doing so. He gives up. Finn doesn't give up so hard that he fights death. I think that's pretty fucking metal. Anyway, Finn reaches the 50th Dead World, but because Adventure Time likes playing with the food of its audience just a little bit, Jake's state of hive mind zen has caused him to forget Finn.
Jake, you found me.
Yeah. Who's Jake?
The nature of the 50th Death World not even withstanding, it's been presumably a long time since Jake died, and whether time moves differently there or not, Jake has been very far away from Finn physically and mentally. It's heartbreaking. But see, Jake is the one who found Finn. Finn didn't enter the 50th Dead World, Jake exited it, because he felt a similar vibration in Finn that even his Zen state couldn't deny. He starts snapping back into his Zen until he sees Finn in danger, and it's enough to snap him back out. Fuck the most coveted Dead World. Fuck inner peace. Fuck an eternity of inner peace. I want to be with my brother again. Finally reunited, Finn and Jake's only goal is to be reincarnated together until New Death destroys the 50th Dead World. It was his plan to have Finn and Jake find each other because it would provide him a narrow window into the 50th and its demise. New Death is trying to destroy all the Dead Worlds for reasons unknown and relegate everyone to the first Dead World, where people have also become a hive mind but in a negative body horror way. The 50th is our closest heaven analog, and the first our closest hell. If New Death were doing this with a sort of no borders, everyone should achieve enlightenment attitude, it would be one thing, but he's not just trying to damn everyone to suffering, he's also trying to stop reincarnation as a whole. He wants to get rid of the afterlife and then the possibility for all future life. It's pretty fucked up. Of course, Finn and Jake can't stand for this. I think you could argue it's partially selfishly motivated on their part, but if the preservation of everyone inherently involves self-preservation, isn't it always a little selfish? Besides, I think they've earned it after 2 full lifetimes of heroism, flawed as they may have been. Man, I haven't even talked about Finn and Jake's parents in this episode. Or Tiffany. They're here too. Goddamn Tiffany.
Because I'm Tiffany!
I'm so glad this episode gave Tiffany his day in the sun. He's a buck wild character who was introduced very early in the show as a sort of joke, and is a great example of how Adventure Time commits to its world, its characters, and itself till the very end. I'm also incredibly glad this episode features Mr. Fox prominently. Mr. Fox has some of the greatest line deliveries in animation. Here is a Mr. Fox moment from Season 5 that is one of the funniest things ever to me as a brief intermission.
My end table. My love seat, yeah. Gee, but it's great to be back home. It's always a blast visiting my cousin City Fox at his future palace. But you just can't beat that old country steez. City Fox's digs be mad sterile. Look at this. This was my grandpa's rug. Some bums let him have it because it was so ugly. And check out these classic stylings! They don't make them like this anymore! Whoa! Almost got me right in my both eyes! Look at my bugs. Man, I always did have the ugliest bugs. What are they doing? Selling each other houses? Yes, sirree, there's some things money can't buy. You see that depression? You can't buy that. You gotta earn it.
Anyway, Finn and Jake visit the manifestation of life, who birthed New Death along with the original Death. She gives Finn and Jake a tool with which to kill New Death. When they go do that, literally fighting Death itself, it's revealed that New Death has been manipulated all along by the Lich, enduring ever still as the force of nature he is. New Death only wants to extinguish all life because the Lich does, and as a way to lash out against parental neglect, expectations, and grief. Bad parenting is, once and for all, the true villain of Adventure Time. In order to kill the Lich, Finn and Jake have to kill New Death, and whoever kills New Death will become Death themselves. Faced with a seemingly impossible sacrifice, the brothers fight over who gets to shoulder the eternal burden of becoming Death, and therefore stay behind while the other reincarnates.
And we both know who needs
Like you're gonna go around harvesting the souls of cute little bunnies? Leave it to your big bro.
I save you!
I save you! You got so many lives ahead of you!
Well, I don't want them! Not if you won't be there with me!
It's a deeply fucking emotional scene. They want each other to live so bad that they're beating the shit out of each other to do it.
I love you!
I love you too!
After 9 seasons and 2 entire fictional lifetimes, Adventure Time earns this moment hard. After all, it's always been Finn and Jake. But then Mr. Fox, goddamn Mr. Fox, unwittingly solves the tragic dilemma for them. Now, Mr. Fox is the New Death, which is just, so good. I love Mr. Fox. I mean, being Death for all eternity probably sucks in a lot of ways, but Mr. Fox is such a Chad for taking that L for our main men, even if he didn't really mean to. A perfect character. The Dead World's restored, Finn decides to start whatever his next reincarnation will be. Jake, though, decides to stay behind. Having gotten the closure of one last adventure with his brother, Finn is as ready as he'll ever be to let Jake go. But maybe he'll never be ready.
Jake, when you left, I kind of freaked out. It was the worst thing to ever happen to me.
Oh, come on. You still had plenty of other things to live for, right?
Yeah, but deep down, I just kept waiting for the day I'd finally see you again. Mr. Death, I want to go back.
Proud of you, bro.
Thanks, bro.
You'll be ready for the 50th before you know it. Go back there and live that best life.
Adventure Time confronts death by defying it, by saying, no, none of this bullshit even matters. All that matters is being with my brother again. God, is that a cathartic sentiment for me, after years of trying to find peace with something that can't really be reconciled with. It's not just Boo for me. I've lost kind of a lot of people and have run a decently wide gauntlet of deaths, both close and distant. I lost all 3 of my grandfathers within 2 years of each other, and I do have 3, which is a story on its own. I've experienced some near deaths too, friends and even my own, sort of, once. I just sort of fell over one day for reasons that will probably forever not be fully known. There was also that one time I thought I had lymphoma and it turned out to be mono. I made a funny comic book about it. Anyway, when you lose people in your life, it doesn't really matter how they go. Of course, if they go violently and or unexpectedly, that makes it even shittier, but there's no kind of loss that isn't fundamentally at odds with the human experience. Even when we've stopped quarreling with our grief and internalized any lessons it had for us, it's still inexorably there, and the people who are gone are still gone. Though it's baked into our culture completely, death is also taboo. It's eldritch. I think it's impossible to be fully at peace with something we will probably never understand. We all try to cheat death in little ways, and those of us with the means to do so in big ways, billion-dollar, customer-obsessed, space-exploring attempts to have a tantrum big enough to leave a mark on this world that will endure after they're gone. I'm doing it too, in my own way, just scribbling on the walls of my cave trying to make peace with the fact that I'm in one. And as far as catharsis in fiction goes, I can't think of a more enduring one than spiting death. Thinking about Finn just waiting to die for the rest of his life after losing Jake is really upsetting. At the same time, I don't think this means he was necessarily suicidal. In the back of my mind, I was just waiting for the moment I'd get to see you again. Doesn't suggest quite that much torment, but it does suggest an emptiness and a longing. A casual, things will never be the same again. And that might be the most human thing Finn's ever gone through. You and I will always be back then, but god damn it, I miss you. Grief never really goes away, and that's okay. So come along with me. Finn jumps into the fog of a new life, alone and with as much peace as he can muster. After all, in a new life with new memories, it won't matter soon anyway. But no, fuck that. Adventure Time does one last radical bait and switch. Jake changes his mind.
No, wait. I'm not your mom.
Wonder what life's gonna turn me into this time. Jake? What are you doing? I just had my donkey epiphany.
I know. I'm just coming back for fun. Because it's great being alive with you.
Good reason.
Come along with me. Will happen, happening, happened. Together again. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole thing. None of my research was particularly academic. I could have gone that route and found similar stories doing similar things throughout history, but that's gotta be somebody else's video essay, because this one's personal. And the little piggy cried me all the way home. My main sources on this video were Paul A. Thomas's unofficial history of Adventure Time, Exploring the Land of Oo, which is a great resource on the show's production, among many other things. Also, the What's So Great About That video essay on Adventure Time was obviously pretty huge for this, and other aspects of my life for that matter. I used the C.S. Lewis quote she brings up at the end in a poem once. There were a few other things like this that I didn't explicitly quote in the video but used as sources and inspiration that I'll leave below. It was a little hard to dig up some of that Tumblr ephemera from the show's airing back in the day. I'm sure most of it is archived, and obviously I did find some of it, but a lot of those episode synopses and people's gut reactions were posted in a very utilitarian, newsflashy kind of way. They're kind of like tweets in that you can find them, but they come and go quickly in the moment unless you make an active effort to save them, which I mostly didn't at the time because there was always new stuff coming, etc. It's possible that the upcoming Fiona and Cake miniseries will produce some more links in this thematic chain.
January 2024, Tucker here. God, this essay has taken forever. From a time when the Fiona and Cake spin-off Season 1 has already concluded, and a Season 2 has been officially greenlit. And indeed, it does thematically expand on the main series, in some really cool ways, too. I really enjoyed it. I debated for a long time just tacking my Fiona and Cake spiel onto the end of this video, but now that there's presumably going to be a Season 2, assuming Warner Brothers doesn't go completely underwater in the meantime. I'm just going to turn it into a separate video at some point. Hopefully there's even more Adventure Time to come after that, but from this point on, we're on this journey together. Anyway, if you like this, please let me know. I'd really appreciate the feedback and to know that I'm not just shouting into the void. If you want to see more of these kinds of videos from me, I have a few ideas. One is about Steven Universe, another is about OKKO, a couple are about music, and I could probably start going on those anytime. You just heard me talk about a cartoon that exists for a really long time. If you want to hear me talk about a cartoon that doesn't exist, I have a very Adventure Time inspired animated series pitch called Pigbog's Kingdom, for which several videos exist on this channel, and a 100-page pitch document exists on my website. I'm working on adapting the pitch book into a series of YouTube videos. I have a feeling it might be more digestible that way, and also get it to new audiences. There'll be more to it than just the original pitch book. I'm gonna add commentary, new art, basically reformat the whole book, and add synopses for every season of the show. It's gonna be fun, so stay tuned for those. Coming eventually, when they're done. I have a website and social media that I'll link below, and I have a Patreon that I mostly use for my personal work, but if people like this kind of stuff from me, I'll definitely incorporate it into the Patreon. I already posted some work in progress stuff from this video on the Patreon as it was being written, so go check that out if you're interested in seeing some behind the scenes. I do all sorts of stuff, basically whatever I feel like, because Glob is dead and I killed him, and if sweetness can win, and it can, then I'll still be here tomorrow to high-five you yesterday, my friend. Peace.
Share them all with you. I'll be here